Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Michael Woods adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, the same ritual he'd performed every morning for the past 12 years. At 38, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that made boardrooms fall silent when he entered. 6'2", with steel gray eyes and a jawline that could cut glass, Michael had built his reputation as a mergers and acquisitions specialist who never lost a deal. His corner office at Preston & Associates overlooked downtown Chicago, but today felt different. 3 months ago, Michael had made the decision that would change everything. After landing the biggest acquisition in the firm's history, a $2.8 billion pharmaceutical merger, he'd chosen to step back. The 60-hour weeks, the constant travel, the pressure that had made him miss too many of his son's baseball games. Carla had complained for years about his absence, and finally, Michael listened. "I want to be present for Sydney's childhood," he'd told his wife over dinner at their favorite steakhouse. "We have enough money saved. I could take a sabbatical, maybe start consulting from home." Carla Woods had smiled that practice smile he'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. Even at 35, she retained the striking beauty that had turned heads when they met at Northwestern University. Auburn hair, emerald eyes, and a figure maintained through religious adherence to yoga and Pilates. "That's wonderful, honey. Sydney will love having his father around more." But something had shifted in those 3 months. Michael, trained to read people's micro-expressions in high-stakes negotiations, noticed the subtle changes. Carla's phone constantly buzzing with work messages. Her late-night yoga sessions that required full makeup. The way she'd flinch when he touched her unexpectedly. Sydney, their 9-year-old son, had inherited Michael's sharp intellect and Carla's artistic sensitivity. A straight A student with a passion for chess and piano, he was everything Michael had hoped for in a child. But lately, Sydney seemed withdrawn, spending more time in his room, his normally bright chatter replaced by uncomfortable silences. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Sydney had said the night before, his small face serious as they worked on a 1,000-piece puzzle together. "Anything, buddy. Do you think Mom loves us?" The question hit Michael like a physical blow. "Of course she does. Why would you ask that?" Sydney shrugged, fitting a corner piece with the concentration of a surgeon. "She seems different, like she's thinking about other things when she looks at us." Michael had dismissed it as childhood insecurity, but the seed of doubt was planted. Now, as he watched Carla in the kitchen, efficiently packing Sydney's lunch while simultaneously texting someone, that doubt bloomed into suspicion. "Another early morning at the studio?" Michael asked, noting her professional attire, a silk blouse and tailored pants that seemed excessive for teaching art classes at the community center. "Board meeting," Carla replied without looking up. "New funding proposals. Might run late. So can you handle Sydney's pickup if the school calls?" "Of course." Michael studied her face, searching for tells he'd learned to recognize in countless business meetings. The slight tension around her eyes, the way her breathing changed when she lied. "All there." Sydney bounded into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder, chess tournament medal gleaming on his jacket. "Dad, are you coming to my match today?" "Wouldn't miss it," Michael said, ruffling his son's dark hair. "Your opponent won't know what hit him." Carla glanced up from her phone, irritation flashing across her features. "Michael, maybe you shouldn't fill his head with so much confidence. It's not healthy." The comment stung. Michael had never known his own father, who'd abandoned the family when Michael was 7. He'd sworn to be different, to be present, to build his son's confidence rather than tear it down. Carla knew this, had supported it for years. Her criticism felt like a betrayal of everything they'd agreed upon. "Confidence isn't the problem," Michael replied evenly. "Self-doubt is." Carla's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, and for just a moment, her face transformed. A soft smile, the kind she used to give Michael when they were newlyweds. Then she remembered where she was, and the mask slipped back into place. "I have to go," she said, grabbing her keys and purse. She kissed Sydney's forehead, a perfunctory peck that barely made contact. "Be good for your father." No kiss from Michael. No love you or see you tonight. Just the click of her heels on the hardwood floor and the sound of her Mercedes pulling out of the driveway. Dad, Sydney's voice was small. Can we make pancakes? Michael looked at his son, really looked at him. 9 years old and already learning that love wasn't guaranteed, that the people who were supposed to protect you could disappear without warning. Not on Michael's watch. Pancakes it is, Michael said, rolling up his sleeves. But we're talking chocolate chip pancakes. The kind your mother says will rot your teeth. Sydney giggled, the first genuine laugh Michael had heard from him in weeks. As they worked together in the kitchen, mixing batter and debating the optimal chocolate chip to pancake ratio, Michael made a silent promise. Whatever was happening with Carla, whatever game she was playing, he would protect his son. And if she was betraying their family, if she was destroying the life they'd built together, she would learn that Michael Woods was not a man who forgave easily. He'd spent his career dismantling companies and rebuilding them stronger. If necessary, he'd do the same with his marriage. The morning passed peacefully, father and son talking about everything and nothing. Sydney's chess strategy, the possibility of a family trip to Yellowstone, whether aliens might play chess. Normal conversations that felt precious in their simplicity. At 11:47 a.m., Michael's phone rang. Riverside Elementary School. Mr. Woods? This is Principal Fleming. I'm afraid Sydney has been taken ill. He vomited in class and is asking for you. Can you come pick him up? Michael was already reaching for his keys. I'll be right there. Chapter 2. The footage. Michael's Range Rover cut through midday traffic with practiced efficiency. Sydney was rarely sick, and when he was, it usually came with a fever or other obvious symptoms. This felt different, sudden and inexplicable. Riverside Elementary sat in one of Chicago's most prestigious neighborhoods, its red brick facade and manicured grounds reflecting the substantial tuition Michael paid for Sydney's education. The building buzzed with the controlled chaos of a school day in progress, children's voices echoing from classrooms as Michael strode toward the main office. Principal Josephine Fleming met him at the door, her expression grave. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. She gestured for Michael to follow her down the corridor. How is he? Michael asked, his pace matching hers. Physically, he seems fine now. No fever, no other symptoms. But Mr. Woods, there's something else we need to discuss. They passed the nurse's office where Michael could see Sydney sitting on a cot, looking pale but alert. The boy's face brightened when he saw his father, but there was something else in his eyes, relief mixed with an emotion Michael couldn't quite identify. Dad! Sydney jumped up, wrapping his arms around Michael's waist. I want to go home. We'll get you home, buddy. But first, let's make sure you're okay. Michael knelt to Sydney's eye level, examining his son's face. What happened? Did you eat something weird? Sydney's eyes darted toward Principal Fleming, then back to his father. My stomach hurt all of a sudden, like when you see something that makes you feel sick inside. An odd way to describe nausea, but children often struggled to articulate physical symptoms. Michael stood, ready to sign whatever paperwork was necessary to take his son home. Mr. Woods, Principal Fleming said, her tone careful. Could I speak with you privately for a moment? Michael glanced at Sydney, who had retreated to the cot. Something was definitely wrong here. Buddy, can you wait here with Nurse Williams while I talk to Mrs. Fleming? Sydney nodded, but Michael caught the flash of anxiety across his son's face. Whatever had happened, it was more than a simple stomach bug. Principal Fleming led him to her office, closing the door with deliberate care. Her desk was organized chaos, student files, scheduling charts, and a coffee mug that read World's Most Patient Principal. She didn't sit, instead moving to stand by the window that overlooked the playground. Mr. Woods, there was an incident today during recess. Sydney witnessed something that, well, it's complicated. Michael's spine straightened. What kind of incident? Your wife came to pick up Sydney early. Around 10:30 a.m. She had proper identification and was on our approved pickup list, so there was no issue with releasing him to her care. Michael's blood pressure spiked. Carla picked him up? She's supposed to be at work. She didn't mention anything about an appointment. That's what concerned us. Sydney seemed confused by the early pickup. He kept asking where you were, why his mother was taking him out of school. When Mrs. Chun, his teacher, asked your wife about the reason for the early departure, she was vague. Said it was a family matter. The pieces weren't fitting together. Carla had specifically asked Michael to handle any school issues because she'd be in meetings all day. Why would she show up unannounced to collect Sydney? Where did they go? Michael asked. Principal Fleming's expression grew more troubled. That's where things get interesting. About an hour later, Sydney returned to school. Alone. He walked through the front doors, went straight to his classroom, and sat down as if nothing had happened. When Mrs. Chun asked where he'd been, Sydney vomited. Michael felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Returned alone? How is that possible? Where was Carla? We don't know. Sydney won't talk about what happened during that hour. He just keeps saying his stomach hurts, and he wants his father. This wasn't making sense. Carla wouldn't abandon Sydney somewhere. Whatever her faults, she wasn't neglectful of their son's safety. Unless, has anyone reviewed the security footage? Michael asked. Principal Fleming nodded. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you privately. The footage is disturbing, not because of any immediate danger to Sydney, but because of what it reveals about the situation. She moved to her computer, pulling up the security system interface. The cameras cover our parking lot and main entrance. What you're about to see might be difficult to watch. The screen flickered to life, showing the familiar view of the school's front parking area. Timestamp, 10:31 a.m. Michael watched Carla's silver Mercedes pull into a visitor space. She emerged from the driver's seat, checking her appearance in the side mirror, a gesture he'd seen thousands of times. Normal. Routine. Fast forward to 10:47 a.m., Principal Fleming said. The same parking lot, now with Carla and Sydney walking toward her car. But Sydney's body language was wrong. His shoulders were hunched, his head down. He moved like a child being led to punishment rather than a son being picked up by his mother. Watch the passenger side, Principal Fleming said quietly. As Carla opened the rear door for Sydney, another figure emerged from the passenger seat. A man, tall, athletic build, wearing a baseball cap that obscured his face from the camera's angle. He said something to Carla that made her laugh, the same soft smile Michael had seen in the kitchen that morning. Who is that? Michael's voice was steel. We don't know. The angle doesn't give us a clear view of his face. But there's more. The footage continued. Carla, Sydney, and the unknown man got into the Mercedes. They drove off together. The timestamp showed they were gone for exactly 53 minutes. Now watch the return, Principal Fleming said, fast-forwarding to 11:40 a.m. The Mercedes returned, but this time only Carla and Sydney got out. The man remained in the passenger seat, his face still concealed. Carla walked Sydney to the entrance, her hand on his shoulder in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Sydney's posture was even more dejected than when they'd left. Michael watched his wife embrace their son, a longer hug than usual. She appeared to be whispering something in his ear. Then she released him and walked back to the car, where the mystery passenger was waiting. Sydney went straight to his classroom and became ill within minutes, Principal Fleming explained. When we tried to call you, we couldn't reach your wife. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Michael's mind was racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Carla had lied about her schedule. She'd picked up Sydney without permission or explanation. She'd taken him somewhere with another man for nearly an hour. And whatever Sydney had witnessed during that time had made him physically sick. I need a copy of that footage, Michael said. Mr. Woods, I understand your concern, but we have protocols. Josephine. Michael's voice carried the authority that had closed billion-dollar deals. My wife lied to me and to your school. She took my son somewhere without authorization, in the company of an unidentified man, and brought him back traumatized. I'm not asking for your permission to protect my family. Principal Fleming studied his face for a long moment. In her years as an educator, she developed a keen sense for reading parents. Michael Woods wasn't a man who made idle threats or empty demands. There was something dangerous in his stillness, like a predator calculating its next move. I'll have our IT department prepare a copy for you, she said finally. But Mr. Woods, if this is heading where I think it is, Please remember that Sydney needs stability above all else. Michael stood, his expression unreadable. Sydney will have stability. I guarantee it. As they returned to collect Sydney, Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. Carla, running later than expected. Board meeting turned into dinner. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you. The casual lie wrapped in false affection. Michael deleted the message without responding. Sydney remained quiet during the drive home, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. Michael wanted to press for details about the missing hour, but his son's fragile state demanded patience. Whatever Sydney had seen, it was traumatic enough to make him physically ill. Pushing now would only cause more damage. Dad, Sydney's voice was barely above a whisper. Yeah, buddy. Are you and Mom going to get divorced? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Michael had always been honest with Sydney, treating him as intelligent enough to handle age-appropriate truths. But this truth, the growing certainty that Carla was having an affair, would shatter his son's world. Why would you ask that? Sydney was quiet for several blocks. When he finally spoke, his words were careful and measured. Sometimes adults do things that hurt other people, and sometimes the people who get hurt can't forgive them. Michael glanced in the rearview mirror. His 9-year-old son was staring back at him with eyes that looked decades older than they should. Whatever happens between your mother and me, Michael said carefully, it won't change how much I love you. You understand that, right? Sydney nodded, but the sadness in his expression suggested he understood far more than any child should have to. As they pulled into their driveway, Michael made a decision. Whatever game Carla was playing, whatever betrayal she was orchestrating, it ended now. He would gather evidence, understand the full scope of her deception, and then he would act. Michael Woods had built his reputation on never losing. He didn't intend to start now. Chapter 3. The plan takes shape. That evening, Michael sat in his home office with the security footage playing on a loop. Frame by frame, he analyzed every detail of the mysterious passenger in Carla's car. The man's build suggested someone in his 30s or 40s, athletic but not bulky. Designer shoes visible when he'd stepped out briefly. Wedding ring on his left hand, a detail that made Michael's jaw clench. Sydney was asleep upstairs, exhausted from the day's emotional trauma. Michael had spent an hour reading with him, letting his son decompress with familiar stories about knights and dragons. Simple tales where heroes always won and villains were easily identified. If only real life offered such clarity. At 9:47 p.m., Carla's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Michael minimized the video file and picked up a business magazine, arranging himself in his leather chair as if he'd been reading all evening. The sound of her heels on a marble foyer echoed through the house, each click deliberate and measured. Michael, I'm home, she called, her voice carrying false brightness. In the office, he replied, without looking up from an article about market volatility that he wasn't actually reading. Carla appeared in the doorway, still wearing the same outfit from that morning, but with subtle changes. Her lipstick had been reapplied recently. Her hair, while professionally styled, showed signs of being touched, the kind of slight musing that came from intimate contact. How did the board meeting go? Michael asked, his tone conversational. Productive, but exhausting. We're applying for a major arts grant, so there's a lot of documentation required. She moved to the built-in bar cart, pouring herself a glass of wine with the practiced ease of someone who needed alcohol to maintain her performance. How was Sydney? Any problems at school? The question was asked with the casual interest of a mother checking on routine matters. No acknowledgement of her unauthorized pickup, no explanation for the mysterious passenger, no concern for why Sydney had become ill. Either she was a masterful actress, or she genuinely believed Michael was unaware of the day's events. He got sick, Michael said, watching her reaction carefully. Vomited in class around noon. I had to pick him up. Carla's hand paused for a fraction of a second before lifting the wine glass to her lips. Poor baby. Is he feeling better? Seems to be. The nurse thought it might be something he ate, but he didn't have breakfast with the usual foods. Michael turned a page in his magazine, maintaining the appearance of distraction. Strange that it came on so suddenly. Children's stomachs are sensitive, Carla replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. Too much excitement, not enough sleep, changes in routine. Any number of things could trigger nausea. Changes in routine, like being unexpectedly picked up from school by a mother who was supposed to be in meetings all day, taken somewhere with a strange man, and returned traumatized. You're probably right, Michael agreed. He seemed particularly upset about something, though. Kept asking if we were getting divorced. This time, Carla's reaction was more pronounced. Her glass clinked against her teeth as she took a hasty sip. That's ridiculous. Where would he get an idea like that? Kids are perceptive. They pick up on tension, changes in family dynamics. Michael finally looked up from his magazine, meeting her eyes directly. Sometimes they see things that adults think they're hiding effectively. For a moment, Carla's mask slipped. Fear flickered across her features before she regained control. Michael, if you have something to say, just say it. The moment of truth. Michael could confront her now, demand explanations, force the crisis into the open. But years of corporate warfare had taught him patience. Information was power, and he didn't yet have enough to ensure total victory. I'm saying our son is worried about his family, Michael replied calmly. And maybe we should be more aware of how our behavior affects him. Carla relaxed slightly, interpreting his words as general marital advice rather than a specific accusation. You're right. We should probably spend more family time together. Maybe plan something special for the weekend. Good idea. Michael returned to his magazine. I'm sure Sydney would enjoy that. They sat in silence for several minutes, the unspoken tension filling the space between them. Carla finished her wine and excused herself to shower and prepare for bed. Michael listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the sound of water running through the pipes, the familiar rhythm of her nighttime routine. When he was certain she was occupied, Michael opened his laptop and began researching private investigators. He needed more than security footage and suspicions. He needed irrefutable evidence of her affair, documentation of her lies, and most importantly, he needed to understand how deep the deception went. The first PI firm he contacted came highly recommended for marital investigations. Discretion guaranteed, their website promised. Evidence that holds up in court. Michael scheduled a consultation for the following morning. Next, he reviewed his financial accounts. Joint checking, savings, investment portfolios, all easily accessible to Carla. If she was planning to leave him for her mystery lover, she might be siphoning money gradually to avoid detection. A quick review showed no unusual withdrawals, but Michael transferred the majority of their liquid assets to accounts in his name only. If Carla wanted to play games with their marriage, she wouldn't be doing it with his money. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Hope your son feels better tomorrow. Kids bounce back fast from stomach bugs. Michael stared at the message, his blood running cold. Someone knew about Sydney's illness, someone who wasn't supposed to have his number. The text felt like a taunt, a demonstration of how closely he was being watched. He screenshotted the message and forwarded it to his personal email for documentation. Then he blocked the number and enabled additional security settings on his phone. Whatever game was being played, it had escalated beyond simple adultery. Upstairs, the shower turned off. Soon Carla would emerge, slip into bed beside him, and continue the charade of their marriage. Michael wondered how long she'd been lying to him, how many board meetings and yoga sessions had been cover for her affair. The betrayal cut deep, but the rage went deeper. Michael Woods was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. In a corporate world, he was known for his ability to turn hostile takeovers into complete domination. Companies that challenged him didn't just lose. They were dismantled piece by piece until nothing remained but cautionary tales. As he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, Michael began formulating his strategy. Phase 1. Gather comprehensive evidence of Carla's infidelity. Phase 2. Identify her lover and understand his weaknesses. Phase 3. Systematically destroy both of them in ways that would serve as permanent reminders of what happened to people who betrayed Michael Woods. Sydney would be protected throughout the process. Whatever the cost to himself, Michael would ensure his son emerged from this stronger rather than broken. The boy had already seen too much, understood too much for his age. But children were resilient, and Sydney would learn valuable lessons about loyalty, consequences, and the importance of choosing allies wisely. Carla was already in bed when Michael entered their bedroom, her breathing deep and even in what appeared to be sleep. But Michael noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes moved beneath closed lids. She was awake, listening, calculating her next move, just as he was calculating his. Let her think she was winning. Let her believe her deception was working. In chess, the most devastating attacks often began with an apparent retreat, luring the opponent into a false sense of security before delivering the killing blow. Michael had taught Sydney that same principle during their games. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the war, he'd explained. The key is making sure your opponent doesn't realize they're already beaten until it's too late to escape. As he settled into bed beside his lying wife, Michael smiled in the darkness. Carla had made her choice. Now she would live with the consequences. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. Michael's appointment with Brewer Investigations was scheduled for 8 a.m. at a discreet office building in downtown Chicago. The firm occupied the 13th floor, with a reception area that looked more like a high-end law office than the stereotypical private investigator setup he'd imagined. Dean Klein, the lead investigator, was a former FBI agent whose reputation for thoroughness had earned him clients ranging from Fortune 500 CEOs to federal prosecutors. At 52, he possessed the kind of quiet intensity that came from decades of uncovering secrets people thought were buried forever. "Mr. Woods," Klein said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his mahogany desk. "I understand you have a marital situation that requires investigation." Michael had prepared for this conversation carefully. In corporate negotiations, information flow was crucial. Share enough to secure cooperation, but never reveal your full strategy. "My wife is having an affair. I need comprehensive documentation for divorce proceedings." "Understood. Do you have any evidence currently?" Michael slid a USB drive across the desk. "Security footage from my son's school yesterday. Timestamp 10:31 a.m. through 11:40 a.m. My wife picked up our 9-year-old son with an unidentified male companion. Took him somewhere for nearly an hour, then returned him to school. She told me she would be in board meetings all day." Klein connected the drive to his computer, watching the footage with the analytical eye of someone who'd seen every variation of human deception. The male subject is careful about camera angles. Knows he's being recorded. This suggests premeditation rather than spontaneous behavior. That's my assessment as well. How long have you suspected the affair? 3 months, since I took a sabbatical from work to spend more time with family. Her behavior patterns changed significantly when I became more present at home. Klein made notes on a legal pad. Has she been careless with her phone, computer, or other communications? She's actually become more secretive. Password protected everything. Changed her phone settings to prevent message previews. But last night, I received this. Michael showed him the anonymous text about Sydney's illness. Someone is monitoring your family's activities, Klein observed. This could be your lover, or it could be a third party. We'll need to investigate both possibilities. Michael leaned forward. I want comprehensive surveillance on my wife. Phone records, email monitoring, GPS tracking, financial activity. Everything legal and admissible in court. That's extensive. Are you prepared for what we might uncover? Sometimes the truth is more devastating than the suspicion. Michael's expression hardened. I'm prepared for anything. What I won't tolerate is being played for a fool while my son is caught in the middle. Klein quoted his rates. Substantial, but reasonable considering the scope of work involved. Michael authorized payment for 2 weeks of intensive investigation, with the option to extend based on findings. We'll need to install tracking software on her devices, Klein explained. That requires physical access to her phone and computer for approximately 10 minutes each. Not a problem. She goes to yoga every Tuesday and Thursday evening. I can create an opportunity. We'll also need to establish financial monitoring. If she's planning to leave you, there might be hidden accounts or unusual transactions. Michael had already begun this process, but Klein's resources would be more comprehensive. Whatever it takes. As Michael left the investigation office, His phone rang. "Carla." "Good morning, honey." Her voice carried the artificial sweetness of someone performing happiness. "I forgot to mention yesterday. I have a lunch meeting with a potential donor today. Might run until mid-afternoon." Another lie. Michael checked his watch. 9:15 a.m. Less than 12 hours since her last fabrication, and she was already constructing her next one. "Of course," Michael replied. "Anyone I might know?" "Brett Pearson. He runs a foundation that supports community arts programs. Very generous patron, but he likes to take his time making decisions." Brett Pearson. Michael filed the name away, already planning to research every detail of the man's life. If this was her lover, his name alone was a major break in the case. "Sounds promising. Will you be able to pick up Sydney from school, or should I handle it?" "You should handle it," Carla said quickly. "Brett prefers longer conversations, and I don't want to seem rushed." "No problem. Sydney and I can grab dinner somewhere if you're running late." "Perfect. Love you." The words felt like ice picks in his chest. "Love you." How easily she wielded that phrase as a weapon, using their shared history to deflect suspicion while she systematically destroyed their marriage. Michael drove home and immediately began researching Brett Pearson online. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. Pearson was 34, a successful commercial real estate developer whose foundation work was well documented in local media. Handsome in the way that attracted women and intimidated men, with the kind of effortless confidence that came from inherited wealth. His LinkedIn profile showed extensive connections in Chicago's arts community, making his interaction with Carla plausible. More disturbing were the society photos from charity events over the past year. Several showed Pearson and Carla together, always in group settings, never obviously intimate, but their body language told a story. The way she angled toward him in conversations, the frequent eye contact, the subtle touches on his arm when she laughed at his comments. Michael found their first public appearance together, a September gallery opening, exactly 3 months ago, right when Carla's behavior had started changing. The timeline was damning. Deeper research revealed more troubling details. Pearson was married to Allison Pearson, a pediatric surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. They had 2 young children and appeared to be the perfect family based on their social media presence. Like Michael and Carla, they seemed to have everything: wealth, career success, beautiful children. But Michael's trained eye spotted the cracks. Pearson's recent Instagram post showed him at events without his wife, claiming she was on call or with the kids. Dr. Allison Pearson's posts had become less frequent and more focused on her work rather than family activities. The classic pattern of a marriage under strain. His phone buzzed with a text from Dean Klein. Initial financial review complete. Found 3 cash withdrawals of $500 each over the past month. Always on days when your wife claimed to be at yoga or board meetings. Transactions occurred at ATMs near the Drake Hotel downtown. The Drake Hotel. Expensive, discreet, frequented by people who valued privacy over economy. Michael had taken Carla there for their 5th anniversary, back when their marriage was genuine rather than a performance. Now she was using their old romantic hideaway to betray him. Michael's rage was building, but he channeled it into planning. Emotional decisions led to tactical errors, and he couldn't afford mistakes. This required the same methodical approach he'd used to dismantle hostile corporations, identify weaknesses, exploit vulnerabilities, and strike when the target was most exposed. He spent the afternoon researching Dr. Allison Pearson, learning everything he could about Brett's wife. A brilliant surgeon, apparently dedicated to her family, completely unaware that her husband was destroying 2 marriages simultaneously. She deserved to know the truth, but timing was crucial. Revealing the affair prematurely might allow both cheaters to escape consequences. At 3:30 p.m., Michael arrived at Riverside Elementary to collect Sydney. His son emerged from the building looking much better than the previous day, his natural resilience having restored his typical energy. "Dad, can we go to that pizza place with the arcade games?" "Absolutely," Michael replied, relieved to see Sydney acting normally. "But first, tell me about your day." "Everything good." Sydney climbed into the Range Rover, buckling his seatbelt with the efficiency of a child accustomed to luxury vehicles. Mrs. Chun asked if I was feeling better, and Tommy Wilkins asked why I left school early yesterday. Michael's attention sharpened. What did you tell him? I said Mom had to take me somewhere. Sydney's voice became smaller. I didn't tell him about the man. The man in Mom's car? Sydney nodded, his earlier enthusiasm fading. Dad, why did Mom take me to that place? And why did the man keep looking at his watch like he wanted to leave? This was the opening Michael had been hoping for, a chance to understand what Sydney had witnessed without traumatizing him further. Can you tell me about the place? What did it look like? It was a big building with lots of windows, like where rich people live in movies. Mom and the man went inside, and I had to wait in the car for a really long time. The Drake Hotel. Michael's suspicions were confirmed, but the detail about Sydney waiting in the car added a new layer of cruelty to the situation. Carla had brought their son along to her affair, forcing him to be complicit in her betrayal. Were you scared waiting by yourself? A little, but mostly I was confused. The man seemed nice when he talked to me, but he kept looking at Mom in a way that made me feel weird. Michael felt his control slipping, rage building like pressure in a sealed container. His wife had exposed their innocent child to her sordid affair, traumatizing Sydney with adult complexities he shouldn't have to understand. That crossed a line from simple adultery into something unforgivable. Dad, Sydney's voice brought him back to the present. Are you okay? You look angry. Michael forced himself to relax, remembering that Sydney needed stability above all else. I'm fine, buddy. Sometimes adults have to deal with complicated problems, but that's not your responsibility. They drove to Pizza Palace, where Sydney's mood improved dramatically as he demolished 3 slices of pepperoni pizza and dominated the arcade games. Michael watched his son laugh and play, memorizing these moments of innocence before the storm that was coming. His phone buzzed with another message from Klein. Subject's phone GPS shows her at the Drake Hotel, room 847. Same location for the past 2 hours. I have operatives in position for photographic evidence. Room 847. The same suite Michael had booked for their anniversary years ago. The symbolism was intentional and vicious. Michael deleted the message and focused on Sydney, who had just achieved a new high score on a driving simulator. Nice work, champ. You're getting good at this. I learned from the best, Sydney grinned, echoing something Michael had said during their first arcade visit years ago. That evening, Carla returned home at 8:30 p.m., her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly messed despite obvious attempts to fix it. She greeted Sydney with genuine warmth, but avoided extended eye contact with Michael. How was your meeting? Michael asked as they prepared for bed. Very productive. Brett is interested in funding our new youth program. She disappeared into their walk-in closet, emerging in silk pajamas that Michael recognized as recent purchases. He wants to schedule a follow-up meeting next week. Sounds like a generous man. He is very passionate about supporting the arts. Michael wondered if she could hear the absurdity of her own words. Passionate about supporting the arts. More like passionate about supporting his wife into hotel beds. As Carla settled into bed beside him, Michael's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Klein containing a single photograph. The image was taken through a hotel window using a telephoto lens. It showed Carla and Brett Pearson in an intimate embrace, both partially clothed, clearly in the aftermath of sexual activity. Michael stared at the photo for several seconds, letting the reality of his wife's betrayal crystallize into cold certainty. No more doubts, no more hoping for innocent explanations. She had chosen to destroy their marriage for a man who was betraying his own family. He forwarded the image to a secure folder and deleted it from his phone. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Michael. Carla's voice was soft in the darkness. Are you awake? Yeah. I love you. Michael didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and emotionless. I know exactly what you are, Carla. And soon, everyone else will too. She shifted beside him, perhaps sensing the menace in his tone, but not understanding its source. What do you mean? Nothing. Just thinking about family loyalty and what it means to honor commitments. Carla fell silent. But Michael could feel her tension in the darkness. Let her wonder. Let her worry. In chess, psychological pressure often forced opponents into making desperate moves that exposed their weaknesses. Michael Woods was done being played. Now, it was his turn to control the game. Chapter 5. The Trap is Set. Dean Klein's report arrived at 6 a.m. via encrypted email, comprehensive and damning. Over the past week, Klein's team had documented 17 separate meetings between Carla and Brett Pearson. Hotels, restaurants, her art studio after hours, even a weekend trip to Lake Geneva that Carla had claimed was a solo retreat for artistic inspiration. The financial evidence was equally devastating. Carla had been gradually moving money from their joint accounts to a separate checking account opened 3 weeks ago. Small amounts to avoid detection, but the pattern was clear. She was funding an exit strategy. Most interesting was the intelligence on Brett Pearson. Klein's research revealed a man with a history of marital infidelity. 2 previous affairs during his 8-year marriage to Dr. Allison Pearson, both with younger women involved in arts organizations his foundation supported. The pattern suggested predatory behavior rather than genuine romance. Your wife isn't his first target, Klein noted in his summary. She's just the latest in a series of married women he's seduced using his foundation work as cover. Michael absorbed this information while Sydney ate breakfast, chattering about an upcoming chess tournament. His son's normalcy felt surreal against the backdrop of documented betrayal and calculated deception. "Dad, you're not listening," Sydney complained good-naturedly. "I said Mrs. Chan wants to enter me in the state championship." "That's fantastic, buddy," Michael replied, forcing himself to focus. "You've been practicing hard. You deserve the opportunity. Will you come watch if I make it to the finals?" Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Sydney beamed, unaware that his father was simultaneously planning the destruction of his mother's secret life. Michael had spent the morning crafting a strategy that would expose both adulterers while protecting Sydney from the worst of the fallout. After dropping Sydney at school, Michael drove to Dr. Allison Pearson's office at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The pediatric surgery wing buzzed with activity. Nurses, residents, worried parents clutching coffee cups in waiting areas. Michael had researched Dr. Pearson extensively and knew her schedule. She had a 15-minute break between surgeries at 10:30 a.m. He found her in the physician's lounge, reviewing patient charts over a cup of coffee. At 31, Allison Pearson was strikingly beautiful in an understated way. Intelligent eyes, confident posture, the kind of composed professionalism that came from saving children's lives on a regular basis. "Dr. Pearson," Michael approached with the careful deference appropriate for interrupting a surgeon. "I'm Michael Woods. I apologize for coming unannounced, but I have information about your husband that you need to see." Allison looked up from her charts, instantly alert. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "My wife is having an affair with Brett. I have photographic evidence." The words hit like a physical blow. Allison's coffee cup trembled slightly, but her expression remained controlled. Years of delivering devastating news to parents had taught her to process shock without losing composure. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why are you telling me this?" Michael sat across from her, pulling out a tablet containing selected images from Klein's surveillance. Nothing pornographic, but intimate enough to leave no doubt about the nature of Carla and Brett's relationship. Hotel embraces, passionate kisses in restaurant parking lots, their bodies intertwined on what appeared to be a private balcony. Allison studied each image with the analytical precision of a surgeon examining X-rays. When she finished, she closed the tablet and leaned back in her chair. "How long?" she asked. "At least 3 months. Possibly longer." "And your wife?" "Carla, you said? She's married to you?" 15 years. We have a 9-year-old son." Allison nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. The late board meetings. The foundation work requiring evening and weekend hours. The sudden interest in supporting emerging artists. Her voice carried bitter recognition. "I should have known. This isn't his first time. I'm aware of his history," Michael said carefully. "But I wanted you to hear it from me before taking any action." "Action?" Allison's laugh was sharp and humorless. What kind of action did you have in mind? Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Brett and Carla think they're being clever, meeting in hotels, using foundation business as cover, planning their escape from their respective marriages. But they've made assumptions about how their betrayed spouses will react, such as they expect us to divorce quietly, divide assets according to standard agreements, and fade away while they build their new life together. Michael's smile was predatory. They're about to learn how wrong they are. Allison studied his face, seeing something that made her lean back slightly. What exactly are you proposing? A coordinated response. We expose their affair publicly, document their deception comprehensively, and ensure they face consequences that extend far beyond simple divorce proceedings. I'm a pediatric surgeon, Allison said slowly. I save children's lives. I don't engage in revenge plots. And I'm a merger and acquisitions specialist who spent 15 years destroying companies that tried to cheat me. Michael's voice remained calm, but intensity radiated from him like heat. The difference is, this time it's personal. Allison was quiet for several minutes, processing the information and the proposal. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new edge. What did you have in mind? Michael outlined his plan. Brett's foundation depended on his reputation as a family man committed to community values. His real estate business relied on trust and personal relationships. His social standing in Chicago's elite circles was built on the image of a devoted husband and father. All of that disappears when his pattern of behavior becomes public knowledge, Michael explained. But we need to coordinate our timing to maximize impact. And Carla, my wife has built her identity around being the perfect mother and devoted partner. Her art career depends on the community connections she's cultivated over years of playing that role. She's also been stealing from our joint accounts to fund her exit strategy. Michael showed Allison the financial evidence Klein had gathered. Embezzlement from a spouse can be prosecuted criminally in Illinois if the amount exceeds certain thresholds. She's already crossed that line. Allison absorbed this information with the same analytical precision she'd applied to the surveillance photos. You're talking about destroying both their lives completely. I'm talking about consequences matching actions. They made choices. Now they live with the results. And our children? How do we protect them from the fallout? Sydney is my priority above everything else, Michael said firmly. Whatever we do, his well-being comes first. But children are resilient when they understand that one parent is fighting to protect the family while the other is tearing it apart. Allison checked her watch. I have surgery in 5 minutes. But Michael, if we do this, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain you want to go to war? Michael thought about Sydney waiting in the car while his mother betrayed their family, about the text messages taunting him with knowledge of his son's distress, about 15 years of marriage being casually discarded for a serial adulterer who collected married women like trophies. They already started the war, he said quietly. I'm just choosing to fight back. Allison stood, gathering her charts and surgical cap. Give me 48 hours to think about this. If I decide to join you, how do we coordinate? Michael handed her a business card with his personal cell number. Text me a single word. Justice. I'll take that as agreement to proceed. And if I decide this is too dangerous, then I proceed alone. But Allison, understand something. This is happening whether you participate or not. The only question is whether you want some control over how it unfolds. Allison nodded and walked toward the surgical wing, her stride confident despite the bombshell that had just exploded her marriage. Michael watched her go, recognizing a kindred spirit. She had the steel necessary for what was coming. His phone buzzed with a text from Carla. Lunch meeting with Brett ran long. Having dinner with him tonight to finalize foundation details. Don't wait up. Michael deleted the message without responding. Let her think she was winning. Let both of them believe they were cleverly managing their deception while their betrayed spouses remained oblivious. At 3:30 p.m., Michael picked up Sydney from school. His son was animated about his chess tournament preparation, demonstrating moves on a pocket chess set during the drive home. Dad, look at this opening. It's called the Queen's Gambit. You sacrifice a pawn early to control the center of the board. Interesting strategy, Michael replied, watching Sydney manipulate the pieces. Sometimes you have to give up something small to gain something bigger. Exactly. And the best part is, your opponent thinks they're winning when they take your pawn, but really you're setting up for a much stronger attack later. Michael smiled, genuinely for the first time in days. His son was inadvertently describing the exact strategy Michael was employing against Carla and Brett. They thought they were winning, stealing time together, planning their future, believing their spouses were helpless to stop them. They had no idea the real game had just begun. That evening, as Carla prepared for another foundation meeting, Michael sat in his office reviewing the final elements of his plan. Everything was in place. Evidence, coordination with Dr. Pearson, timing for maximum impact. His phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. Justice. Dr. Allison Pearson had made her choice. The war was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 6. The Alliance. Michael met Dr. Allison Pearson at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, far enough from both their usual haunts to avoid accidental encounters with mutual acquaintances. She arrived precisely on time, her professional composure intact, but with an underlying tension that suggested sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Allison said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from him. "Before I commit to anything, I need to understand exactly what you're planning." Michael appreciated her directness. Complete exposure and systematic destruction of their ability to continue their affair or build a life together. Be more specific. Michael pulled out a folder containing detailed plans he'd spent the past 2 days refining. Phase 1. Document their pattern of deception comprehensively. We need irrefutable evidence of not just the affair, but the lies, financial theft, and emotional abuse of their families. Phase 2. Simultaneous public exposure. Brett's foundation board receives evidence of his misuse of charitable work for personal affairs. Your hospital administration learns about his pattern of targeting married women in vulnerable positions. Carla's art community discovers her theft from joint marital assets and abandonment of family responsibilities. Allison nodded slowly. Phase 3. Legal and financial consequences. Divorce proceedings that ensure maximum penalty for adultery and theft. Civil suits for alienation of affection and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Criminal charges where applicable. And Phase 4. Michael's smile was cold. Personal destruction. Brett loses his foundation, his business relationships, his social standing. Carla loses her artistic credibility, her community connections, her ability to play the victim. They get exactly what they've earned. Allison studied the documentation, her surgeon's mind analyzing each element for flaws or excessive risk. This is incredibly thorough and ruthless. They chose to make war on our families. I'm simply ensuring they lose that war decisively. What about collateral damage? Your son, my children, innocent people who might be affected? Sydney is my primary concern, Michael said firmly. Everything I'm planning is designed to protect him while teaching him important lessons about loyalty and consequences. Your children will be better off learning their father's true character now rather than discovering it years later when the damage is even worse. Allison was quiet for several minutes, weighing decisions that would reshape multiple lives. When she spoke again, her voice carried resolve. I'm in, but I have conditions. Name them. First, no physical violence. We destroy them professionally and socially, but we don't cross into assault or intimidation. Agreed. Second, we protect the children above all else. If any part of this plan threatens their psychological well-being, we modify or abort. Absolutely. Third, we document everything we do so that if this escalates legally, we can prove our actions were measured responses to their betrayal rather than harassment. Michael respected her caution. Smart thinking. Anything else? Yes. When this is over, we don't become friends or support each other through the aftermath. This is a tactical alliance, not a personal relationship. We both need to rebuild our lives separately. Understood. Michael extended his hand across the table. Partners in justice? Allison shook it firmly. Partners in justice. They spent the next hour coordinating their timeline. Klein's surveillance team had identified a pattern in Carla and Brett's meetings. Every Thursday, they met at the Drake Hotel for 3 hours, arriving separately and leaving together. This Thursday, Michael and Allison would be ready with photographers, financial documentation, and witnesses. I've arranged for a private investigator to document their meeting from inside the hotel, Michael explained. My PI has connections with hotel security who can provide access to hallway cameras. And I've contacted a forensic accountant to analyze both our financial records, Allison added. We need to document the full scope of their financial deception before they can hide assets or claim ignorance. They were interrupted by Allison's phone buzzing with a text message. She glanced at it, her expression hardening. Brett, asking if I can pick up the kids tonight because he has a late foundation meeting. What will you tell him? That I'll handle it, of course. I always do. Allison's bitterness was evident. He's been using my dedication to our children as cover for his affairs. Every time he needs to meet Carla, he creates a situation where I have to manage family responsibilities alone. Michael felt a surge of protective anger on her behalf. That ends Thursday. After we expose them, he won't be able to manipulate you anymore. I'm looking forward to that conversation, Allison said with grim satisfaction. They parted ways with encrypted communication protocols established and specific assignments for gathering final evidence. Michael drove home feeling energized for the first time in months. Having an ally, especially one as intelligent and determined as Dr. Pearson, doubled his confidence in the plan's success. Sydney was in the living room when Michael arrived, surrounded by chess books and practicing complex endgame scenarios. His son's dedication to mastering the game reminded Michael of his own obsessive preparation for corporate battles. How's the tournament preparation going? Michael asked, settling beside Sydney on the couch. Really good. I learned this amazing sacrifice play where you give up your queen to force checkmate in 4 moves. Want to see? Michael watched Sydney demonstrate the tactical sequence, marveling at his son's growing sophistication. That's brilliant, buddy. Sometimes the biggest sacrifice leads to the most decisive victory. Mrs. Chun says chess teaches you to think 10 moves ahead. Like, you have to see what your opponent might do and be ready for all the possibilities. She's absolutely right. The best chess players and the best people always have contingency plans. Sydney nodded seriously. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. If someone lies to you, is it okay to lie back to them? The question caught Michael off guard. What do you mean? Like if someone is being mean or dishonest, can you trick them back to protect yourself? Michael chose his words carefully. Sometimes protecting yourself or your family requires strategic thinking. The important thing is making sure your actions match your values and that you're fighting for the right reasons. So, it's okay to be sneaky if someone is being sneaky to you first. It's okay to be smart when someone is trying to hurt you or the people you love. Sydney seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to his chess studies. But Michael wondered what had prompted the question. Children picked up on adult tensions, even when adults thought they were being subtle. At 7:30 p.m., Carla called to say she'd be having a working dinner with potential foundation donors and wouldn't be home until late. Michael no longer felt the stab of betrayal that had accompanied her earlier lies. Now, her deception simply provided more rope for her to hang herself with. No problem, he told her. Sydney and I are having a great evening. Take all the time you need. After Sydney went to bed, Michael reviewed the final details of Thursday's operation. Klein's team would be positioned throughout the Drake Hotel with multiple photographers and recording equipment. The hotel's security chief, motivated by a substantial cash payment, would provide access to service corridors and elevator cameras. Most importantly, Michael had arranged for Dr. Pearson to accidentally encounter Carla and Brett in the hotel lobby. The confrontation would be recorded, providing irrefutable evidence of their affair while demonstrating their callous disregard for their betrayed spouses. His phone buzzed with a message from Allison. Forensic accountant found $23,000 in unauthorized transfers from your joint accounts to Carla's private account. Also discovered Brett has been using foundation funds to pay for hotel rooms and restaurant meals. We have them on multiple felonies. Michael smiled grimly. Financial crimes carried serious legal consequences and would add credibility to their claims of systematic deception. The Foundation Board would have no choice but to remove Brett immediately, and the IRS would likely launch their own investigation. Wednesday passed in a blur of final preparations. Michael maintained his normal routine with Sydney, school pickup, homework help, dinner together, while orchestrating the most complex revenge operation of his life. The dichotomy felt surreal but appropriate. He was simultaneously protecting his son's innocence and preparing to shatter the illusions that threatened their family. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. Michael dressed carefully in his sharpest business suit, armor for the battle ahead. As he prepared Sydney's breakfast, his son looked up from his cereal with a serious expression. "Dad, are you going somewhere important today? Why do you ask? You look like you're getting ready for war." Michael paused, struck by his son's perceptiveness. Sometimes adults have to have difficult conversations to protect their families. Like when you told Tommy Wilkins' dad to stop bullying kids at the playground. Michael remembered that incident from the previous year. A father who thought his son's aggressive behavior was boys being boys, until Michael had a private conversation about appropriate boundaries and consequences. Something like that, Michael agreed. Sometimes people need to learn that their actions have consequences. Sydney nodded solemnly. "I hope the difficult conversation goes okay." "It will," Michael assured him. Sometimes the truth is hard to hear, but it's always better than living with lies. As Michael dropped Sydney at school, he felt the weight of impending justice settling over him like a familiar coat. Today, Carla and Brett would learn what happened when they chose to betray Michael Woods and Dr. Allison Pearson. They had no idea what was coming. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. The Drake Hotel's elegant lobby buzzed with its usual mixture of business travelers and wealthy tourists. Michael positioned himself behind a marble pillar with a clear view of the elevators, wearing dark glasses and a baseball cap to avoid recognition. Dean Klein's surveillance team was scattered throughout the area, one reading a newspaper by the concierge desk, another checking in at the reception counter, a third nursing coffee in the adjacent bar. At 1:47 p.m., Carla's silver Mercedes pulled up to the valet station. Michael watched his wife emerge, wearing a black dress he'd never seen before and carrying an overnight bag that made his jaw clench. She moved through the lobby with confident purpose, clearly familiar with the route to the elevators. Brett Pearson arrived 7 minutes later in his silver Porsche, following the same routine. He checked in under the name B. Patterson, close enough to his real name to avoid confusion, but different enough to provide plausible deniability if questioned. The desk clerk handed him a key card without requiring identification, suggesting this was an established arrangement. Michael's earpiece crackled with Klein's voice. "Both subjects are in the elevator, heading to the 8th floor. Team 2 is in position in the service corridor." Phase 1 was proceeding perfectly. Now came the delicate timing required for Phase 2. At 2:15 p.m., Dr. Allison Pearson entered the hotel lobby. She looked stunning in a tailored business suit, her professional confidence commanding attention from both male and female observers. She approached the concierge desk and spoke loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. "I'm meeting my husband, Brett Pearson, for drinks. Could you call his room and let him know I'm here?" The concierge's expression shifted from helpful to uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have a guest registered under that name." "That's strange," Allison replied, her voice carrying perfectly to Michael's recording device. "He specifically told me to meet him here at 2:30. Room 847, he said. Michael watched the concierge's face change as he realized he was being placed in an impossible position. The hotel's registration system would show B. Patterson in room 847, but policy prevented him from revealing guest information. "Perhaps there's been a miscommunication," the concierge suggested diplomatically. "Perhaps there has," Allison agreed, her tone sharpening. "Would it be possible for you to call room 847 and ask if Mr. Patterson is expecting Dr. Allison Pearson?" The concierge reluctantly made the call. Michael could see him speaking in hushed tones, then waiting for a response. When he hung up, his expression was that of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. The guest in room 847 says he's not expecting anyone and requests not to be disturbed. Allison's composure cracked slightly, just enough to appear genuine rather than theatrical. I see. Well, that's illuminating. She turned away from the desk, pulling out her phone and dialing a number. Michael could hear her end of the conversation clearly. Brett? It's Allison. I'm in the lobby of the Drake Hotel, looking for you. What do you mean you're the office? You told me to meet you here for drinks. No, I'm quite certain about the location. Room 847, you said. Michael watched other guests in the lobby, turning to observe the unfolding drama. A wife confronting her husband's lies in public was the kind of spectacle that drew attention like a magnet. Brett, I'm standing right here. The concierge confirms that someone in room 847 doesn't want to be disturbed. Are you going to explain this, or should I go up there myself? The phone call ended abruptly. Allison stared at her phone for a moment, then walked deliberately toward the elevators. Michael's heart rate increased. This was the moment of maximum risk. If Brett or Carla realized they were being deliberately exposed, they might find ways to minimize the damage. At 2:28 p.m., the elevator arrived at the 8th floor. Klein's voice crackled through Michael's earpiece. Dr. Pearson is approaching room 847. She's knocking on the door. Michael wished he could witness the confrontation directly, but the hallway cameras would capture everything they needed. He could only imagine the shock on Carla and Brett's faces when Allison's voice penetrated their afternoon of adultery. Team 2 reports, door is opening. Subject Pearson appears to be in a hotel bathrobe. Dr. Pearson is speaking to him, but we can't make out the words from this distance. Michael checked his watch. Right on schedule. In approximately 3 minutes, Carla would have to emerge from the room or remain hidden while her lover's wife confronted him. Either choice would provide devastating evidence. Movement in the hallway, Klein reported. Dr. Pearson is entering the room. Door remains open. This was even better than Michael had hoped. Allison was forcing the confrontation into the open, making it impossible for either adulterer to deny what was happening. 2 minutes later, voices became audible in the hotel lobby as the elevator descended. Michael moved closer to his observation position, ensuring his recording equipment would capture every word. The elevator doors opened, revealing Brett Pearson in hastily assembled clothes, followed by Dr. Allison Pearson with her professional composure intact, and finally Carla in her black dress looking disheveled and panicked. "This is ridiculous, Allison," Brett was saying as they crossed the lobby. "You're making a scene over a perfectly innocent business meeting." "Business meeting?" Allison's voice carried across the marble space. "Is that what you call it when you check into hotel rooms under false names with married women?" Heads turned throughout the lobby. The concierge looked mortified. The valet staff paused their activities to observe the unfolding drama. Carla spoke for the first time, her voice shaky. "Dr. Pearson, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Allison cut her off. "I know exactly what you are and exactly what this is. The question is whether your husband knows." Michael felt a surge of admiration for Allison's performance. She was dismantling both adulterers with surgical precision while maintaining the moral high ground. "My husband is aware of my foundation work," Carla replied, trying to regain composure. "Brett's organization has been very supportive of community arts programs." "I'm sure they have," Allison said dryly, "though I doubt the foundation board approved funding for hotel rooms and overnight bags." Brett stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Allison, you're being irrational. I won't tolerate this kind of public humiliation." "You won't tolerate it?" Allison's voice rose slightly. "Brett, you've been systematically lying to me for months, using our children as cover for your affairs, and stealing from your own foundation to pay for hotel rooms. What exactly do you think you're in a position to not tolerate?" The lobby had gone completely silent, except for Allison's voice echoing off the marble surfaces. Michael counted at least 20 witnesses, including hotel staff who would remember this confrontation for years. Carla looked around desperately, finally spotting Michael behind his pillar. Her face went pale as she realized the scope of what was happening. "Michael," her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Michael stepped into view, removing his sunglasses and cap. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority that had dominated countless boardrooms. "I'm documenting the destruction of our marriage, Carla. 15 years of vows, 3 months of lies, and approximately $23,000 in theft from our joint accounts." The precision of his numbers hit like physical blows. Carla stumbled backward, her face cycling through shock, fear, and desperate calculation. "Michael, I can explain." "No need," Michael replied calmly. "I have photographs, financial records, witness statements, and now this public admission of your affair. The explanation is quite clear. Brett attempted to regain control of the situation. This is harassment. I'm calling hotel security." "Please do," Allison encouraged. "I'm sure they'd be interested to learn about your use of false identities and your foundation's questionable expense practices." Michael watched both adulterers realize simultaneously that they were trapped. No escape route, no plausible denials, no way to minimize the damage. They had been outmaneuvered completely. "The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning," Michael informed Carla. "You'll also be hearing from the district attorney regarding the embezzlement charges. Dr. Pearson, I believe you mentioned involving the foundation board." "Monday morning as well," Allison confirmed, "along with the IRS, the Illinois Attorney General's office, and the Ethics Committee at Northwestern Memorial." Carla's legs gave out, and she sank into a nearby chair. The reality of her situation was finally penetrating. Professional ruin, criminal charges, social ostracism, and the loss of everything she'd built over 15 years of marriage. "Sydney," she whispered. "What about Sydney?" Michael's expression hardened. "You should have thought about Sydney before you brought him along to witness your betrayal. He knows exactly what you are, Carla. The only question is whether he'll forgive you eventually." "And my children?" Brett demanded, turning to Allison. "We'll learn that actions have consequences," Allison replied. An important lesson their father apparently never mastered. Michael surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. 2 lives destroyed, 2 marriages ended, multiple careers ruined. The price of betrayal had been paid in full. "Enjoy your new life together," he told the defeated couple. "You've certainly earned it." As Michael walked away from the wreckage of his marriage, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The war was over. Justice had been served. Now he could focus on building a better life for Sydney and himself. The truth had set him free. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The aftermath unfolded with the systematic precision of a controlled demolition. By Monday morning, Michael's attorneys had filed divorce papers citing adultery, abandonment, and conversion of marital assets. The criminal complaint regarding Carla's embezzlement was submitted to the Cook County District Attorney's Office within hours. Dr. Allison Pearson's coordination with the Foundation Board proved devastatingly effective. Board Chairman Douglas Fry called an emergency meeting for Tuesday morning after reviewing the evidence package Allison had prepared. Photographic documentation of Brett's hotel meetings, financial records showing misuse of foundation funds, and witness statement from the Drake Hotel confrontation painted an irrefutable picture of systematic deception. Michael sat in his home office, reviewing updates from Dean Klein while Sydney practiced piano in the living room. The melody of Bach's Invention No. 1 filtered through the house, a soundtrack of normalcy against the backdrop of strategic destruction. Subject Pearson has been terminated from all foundation positions, Klein reported via encrypted message. The board voted unanimously to remove him and is considering pursuing criminal charges for embezzlement. His real estate firm received copies of the evidence package this morning. Michael smiled grimly. Brett's professional destruction was proceeding exactly as planned. Without his foundation work to provide credibility and his established business relationships crumbling under scandal, Pearson would struggle to maintain his lifestyle or social position. A follow-up message detailed Carla's situation. Subject Woods has been removed from all community arts board positions. 3 upcoming exhibitions featuring her work have been canceled. The Lakeshore Gallery is considering legal action to recover advance payments for work that may now be considered controversial. The art community's reaction have been swift and unforgiving. Carla's carefully cultivated image as a devoted wife and mother was central to her artistic credibility. Without that foundation, her career was collapsing as quickly as her marriage. Sidney finished his piano practice and wandered into the office, settling into the leather chair across from Michael's desk. At 9 years old, he possessed an unsettling ability to read adult moods and situations. "Dad, Mom called my school today," Sidney said without preamble. "She wanted to pick me up early again." Michael's attention sharpened. "What did you tell them?" "I told Mrs. Fleming that I only wanted to go home with you. She said that was okay because you're my primary guardian now." Michael had filed for emergency custody as part of the divorce proceedings, citing Carla's pattern of involving Sidney in her adultery and the emotional trauma he'd experienced. The court had granted temporary custody, pending a full hearing. "How do you feel about that?" Michael asked carefully. Sidney was quiet for a moment, his young face serious. "I'm sad that Mom made bad choices, but I'm glad you're protecting me from having to see things I shouldn't see." The maturity of his response was heartbreaking. No 9-year-old should have to navigate adult betrayal and moral complexity. But Sidney was handling the situation with remarkable resilience. "Do you want to talk about anything you saw or heard that day?" Michael offered. "The man in Mom's car kept looking at his watch," Sidney said thoughtfully, like he was worried about something. "And Mom kept touching his arm when she talked to him. It made me feel weird inside." "That feeling was your instincts telling you something was wrong," Michael explained. "It's important to trust those feelings." "Is that why you got angry? Because your instincts told you Mom was lying?" Michael marveled at his son's ability to connect emotional dots. "Exactly. Sometimes adults think they're being clever, but children see more than they realize." Sidney nodded sagely. "Mrs. Chun says chess teaches you to see patterns other people miss. Maybe real life is like chess too." "How so?" "Like, Mom and that man thought they were winning because they were keeping secrets. But really, you were setting up a trap they couldn't see." Michael felt a surge of pride in his son's analytical thinking. "What made you realize that?" "You got really calm when Mom started lying more. Like you do when you're about to win a chess game. You weren't upset anymore. You were planning." The observation was disturbingly accurate. Michael had indeed shifted from emotional reaction to strategic planning once he decided to destroy both adulterers completely. "Sidney, I need you to understand something important," Michael said seriously. "What I did to your mother and Mr. Pearson was necessary to protect our family. But it's not something I enjoyed. Sometimes being strong means doing difficult things for the right reasons." "I understand," Sidney replied. "Like when you have to take medicine that tastes bad to get better." Exactly like that. They were interrupted by Michael's phone ringing. Dr. Allison Pearson's name appeared on the screen. "Dr. Pearson," Michael answered formally. "The Foundation Board meeting is over," Allison reported. "Brett has been terminated effective immediately. They're also pursuing criminal charges and civil recovery of misappropriated funds." "How much exposure are we talking about?" "Approximately $180,000 in questionable expenses over the past 2 years. The IRS is opening a formal investigation." Michael whistled low. Federal tax fraud carried serious penalties, potentially including prison time. Brett's destruction was more complete than Michael had originally planned. "What about your personal situation?" Michael asked. "Divorce papers filed this morning. Emergency custody granted for the children. Brett is currently staying at his brother's house because I changed the locks." Allison's efficiency was impressive. She dismantled her marriage with the same precision she applied to surgery. "Any regrets?" Michael asked. "None. My children asked why Daddy was in trouble, and I told them he'd been dishonest about important things. They seem relieved to understand why our family has been so tense lately." Children always knew when their parents were living lies. The relief in Allison's voice suggested her kids were experiencing the same peace Sidney had found in finally understanding the truth. "Allison, I want you to know, working with you made this possible. I couldn't have achieved this level of justice alone. It was necessary, she replied simply. They thought they could destroy our families without consequences. They were wrong. After ending the call, Michael returned his attention to Sydney, who had been listening with the intense focus he applied to chess problems. Dad, is Dr. Pearson okay? She's strong like you. Sometimes when bad things happen, strong people help each other fix the problems. Are you and Dr. Pearson going to be friends now? Michael considered the question carefully. We helped each other through a difficult situation, but now we both need to focus on rebuilding our own families. Sydney nodded, understanding the distinction. Like teammates who work together for one game, but play for different teams usually. That's a perfect analogy. Michael's laptop chimed with an incoming email from Dean Klein. The subject line read, Final Report, Operation Justice. Klein's summary was comprehensive and satisfying. Both targets had been professionally destroyed, financially compromised, and socially ostracized. Criminal investigations were proceeding against both Brett and Carla. The affair had been exposed so thoroughly that rebuilding their reputations would be impossible. Most importantly, both Michael and Allison had maintained the moral high ground throughout the process. They'd simply revealed the truth about their spouse's behavior and allowed natural consequences to unfold. The beauty of this operation, Klein noted in his summary, is that you didn't destroy them. You simply removed the lies that were protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. Michael saved the report and closed his laptop. The war was officially over. Now came a more challenging task of building a better life for Sydney and himself. Dad, Sydney's voice interrupted his thoughts. When people betray you, do you ever forgive them? The question cut to the heart of everything that had happened. Michael chose his words carefully. Forgiveness is complicated, buddy. Some people make mistakes and genuinely regret them. Those people deserve second chances. But some people make calculated choices to hurt others, and they only regret getting caught. Which kind was Mom? Michael looked at his son's earnest face, seeing intelligence and strength that would serve him well throughout life. Your mother made choices over several months. She had many opportunities to stop and do the right thing. Instead, she continued lying and stealing and involving you in her deception. So she's the second kind. I'm afraid so. Sydney was quiet for several minutes, processing this harsh reality. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. Then I don't think I want to forgive her either. Not now, anyway. Michael felt his heart break for his son's lost innocence, but also pride in Sydney's clear moral reasoning. At 9 years old, he understood concepts of loyalty and consequence that many adults struggled with. That's your choice to make, Michael said gently. And you don't have to decide forever right now. People can change, and feelings can change too. But you won't take her back. Never, Michael replied with absolute certainty. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Sydney nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. They sat together in comfortable silence as the evening light faded outside Michael's office windows. The phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Carla's number. Michael declined the call without hesitation. Whatever she wanted to say, apologies, explanations, desperate attempts at reconciliation, he had no interest in hearing. Carla Woods had made her choices. Now she would live with the consequences. Justice had been served. The future belonged to the strong. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Michael stood in the audience of the Illinois State Chess Championship, watching Sydney analyze his position in the final game. His son had exceeded every expectation, advancing through tournament after tournament with the methodical precision of a seasoned strategist. The boy across from Sydney was older and more experienced, but Michael could see the confidence in his son's posture. Sydney was thinking 5 moves ahead, seeing patterns his opponent couldn't recognize, patient in his execution of a winning strategy. He's got this, whispered Tom Sellers, another parent whose son had been eliminated in the semifinals. Sydney plays like a computer. No emotional mistakes, just pure logic. Michael nodded, pride swelling in his chest. The past 6 months had transformed both father and son. Sydney had channeled his experience with adult betrayal into an understanding of human nature that served him well in competitive chess. He could read opponents' psychological tells exploit their impatience, and maintain composure under pressure. "Checkmate," Sydney announced quietly, moving his queen into position for the final blow. The tournament hall erupted in applause as Sydney became the youngest player ever to win the Illinois State Championship in his division. Michael pushed through the crowd to embrace his son, both of them grinning with the joy of hard-earned victory. "I'm proud of you, champ," Michael said, lifting Sydney off his feet in a bear hug. "I used the Queen's Gambit opening you taught me," Sydney beamed. "Sacrificed a pawn early to control the center, just like we practiced." Later, as they celebrated with ice cream at Sydney's favorite restaurant, Michael reflected on how much their lives had improved since the destruction of his marriage to Carla. The initial trauma had been difficult, but the clarity that followed had been liberating. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Sydney said, pausing with his spoon halfway to his mouth. "Always. Do you think Mom watches my chess games online?" The question caught Michael off guard. Sydney's tournaments were sometimes live-streamed, and it was possible Carla followed his progress from whatever life she'd built after a spectacular fall from grace. "Would it matter to you if she did?" Michael asked carefully. Sydney considered this seriously. "I think it would make me sad. Not because I miss her, but because she gave up the right to be proud of me." The maturity of his response was stunning. At 9 years old, Sydney had developed a moral framework that many adults lacked. He understood consequences, loyalty, and the difference between love and enabling destructive behavior. "That's a very wise way to think about it," Michael said. "I learned it from watching you," Sydney replied matter-of-factly. "You taught me that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their bad choices." Michael's phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Allison Pearson. Saw Sydney's championship on the news. "Congratulations to both of you." Over the past months, Michael and Allison had maintained minimal contact, brief updates on legal proceedings, coordination on school events since their children attended the same chess club, professional courtesy between former allies. Their marriage-ending partnership had achieved its goals, but both understood the importance of rebuilding separately. "Dr. Pearson says congratulations," Michael told Sydney. "How are her kids doing?" "Very well from what I hear. Sometimes difficult experiences make families stronger when they're handled properly." Sydney nodded, understanding the reference to their own situation. The trauma of Carla's betrayal had ultimately brought father and son closer together, creating a bond based on mutual respect rather than simple biology. Michael's phone rang as they drove home. Dean Klein's name appeared on the screen. "Michael, I have an update on the Pearson situation you might find interesting." "Go ahead." Brett Pearson was sentenced this afternoon. 18 months federal prison for tax fraud and embezzlement. He'll also owe $340,000 in restitution to the foundation. Michael felt a grim satisfaction. The legal system had functioned exactly as designed, punishing financial crimes with appropriate severity. Brett's destruction was now complete and official. What about Carla's situation? Plea bargain accepted. 6 months home confinement, 2 years probation, and full restitution of the stolen marital assets. She'll also have to complete community service and financial counseling. The sentence seemed light compared to Brett's, but Michael understood the practical considerations. Carla was a first-time offender with a minor child, factors that typically resulted in reduced penalties. Any word on her living situation? She's renting a studio apartment in Wicker Park, working part-time at a community college teaching basic art classes. Very different lifestyle from what she's accustomed to. Michael felt no sympathy for her reduced circumstances. Carla had chosen to destroy their family for the excitement of an affair with a serial adulterer. She was experiencing exactly the life she'd earned through her choices. After ending the call, Michael glanced at Sydney in the rearview mirror. His son was studying chess notation in a tournament program, already analyzing games for improvement opportunities. "Sydney, do you ever wonder what your life would be like if Mom hadn't made those bad choices?" Sydney looked up from his program. "Sometimes, but then I think about how strong we are now and how much we trust each other, and I think maybe this is better." "Better how?" "Before, I was always worried about things I couldn't understand. Now I know you'll always tell me the truth, even when it's hard. That feels safer." Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion. His son had learned lessons about trust and integrity that would serve him throughout life. The price had been high, but the foundation they'd built together was unshakable. As they pulled into their driveway, Michael made a decision that had been forming for weeks. "How would you feel about moving somewhere new?" he asked. "Maybe Colorado or North Carolina. Someplace where we could have a fresh start." Sydney's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? Like a total adventure. Like a total adventure. New house, new schools, new chess clubs to dominate. Can we get a dog?" Michael laughed, the first genuinely carefree sound he'd made in over a year. "We can definitely get a dog." That evening, as Sydney worked on homework at the kitchen table and Michael researched relocation options, they settled into the comfortable rhythm of their new life. No tension, no lies, no walking on eggshells around someone whose loyalties were divided. Michael's laptop chimed with an email from an executive recruiting firm in Denver. A boutique M&A consultancy was seeking someone with his experience and reputation. The offer was substantial, the location perfect for outdoor activities Sydney would love, and the opportunity to build something new from scratch was appealing. "Dad, look at this chess problem," Sydney called from the table. Michael closed the laptop and moved to examine the position Sydney was analyzing. It was a complex endgame scenario requiring precise calculation and strategic patience. "What do you think?" Sydney asked. Michael studied the board, seeing the solution emerge from the apparent chaos. Queen's sacrifice on the 7th rank. Forces the king into the corner for mate in 6 moves. "That's exactly what I thought," Sydney exclaimed. Sometimes the most dramatic move is also the right move. As Michael helped his son work through the tactical sequence, he reflected on the parallels to their real-life situation. The destruction of his marriage had felt dramatic and brutal, but it had ultimately led to a stronger, more honest relationship with Sydney. Some sacrifices were worth making when they led to decisive victory. Later, after Sydney had gone to bed, Michael sat in his office drafting a response to the Denver opportunity. A new city, a new career challenge, and a chance to build something better with his son. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities that hadn't existed when he was trapped in a dying marriage built on lies. His phone buzzed with one final message of the day. An unknown number saw the chess championship. Sydney looked happy. "I hope you both find peace." Michael stared at the message for several seconds, recognizing Carla's writing style, despite the unfamiliar number. She was reaching out from whatever diminished life she'd built, perhaps seeking forgiveness or reconciliation. He deleted the message without responding. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay that way. Michael Woods was not a man who forgot betrayal or rewarded those who chose to destroy their families for selfish pleasure. Sydney had learned the same lesson: strength, loyalty, and consequences. The foundation for a life built on solid principles rather than convenient lies. Michael turned off his phone and began planning their move to Colorado. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he was content to enjoy the peace that came from winning a war against those who had underestimated his resolve. Justice had been served. The future belonged to those who honored their commitments and protected what mattered most. In the end, that was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Test of Loyalty. Frank Mueller adjusted his safety harness as he hammered the final shingle onto the Andersons' roof. At 42, his weathered hands moved with the precision of someone who had spent 2 decades in construction. The June sun beat down mercilessly, but Frank barely noticed. He had learned long ago to endure discomfort. It was a skill that had served him well in more ways than his neighbors could imagine. His phone buzzed against his chest. Tyler's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, Dad." His 17-year-old son's voice carried an odd mixture of excitement and cruelty. Happy Father's Day, I guess. Frank paused, hammer halfway to the next nail. Something in Tyler's tone set off alarm bells. Thanks, son. How was your day with your mother? Oh, it was great. Really great, actually. Tyler's laugh held no warmth. Mom told me some interesting things, like how you're basically broke and we're moving in with Rick. You know, her boyfriend? The hammer slipped from Frank's grip, clattering down the roof before catching in the gutter. 23 years of marriage, and Linda had finally shown her true colors. But it was Tyler's next words that cut deepest. Rick's rich and successful, Dad. Unlike you. The teenager's voice grew more animated, feeding off what he perceived as his father's weakness. Mom's already changed the locks. She said maybe you should get a job that actually pays. $23,000 a year isn't enough for a real man. Frank closed his eyes, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest. His son, his own blood, was laughing at him, mocking the very sacrifices Frank had made to test their family's loyalty. For 3 years, he had lived as a simple contractor, hiding his true wealth to see if his wife and son loved him for who he was, not what he owned. Now he had his answer. Interesting, Frank said quietly. What's interesting? Tyler's laughter faltered slightly at his father's calm tone. Frank pulled out his second phone, the one Linda and Tyler had never seen. Give me 1 minute, son. The call connected on the first ring. Donovan Industries, this is Rick Donovan. Rick, this is Frank Mueller. We need to talk. There was a pause. Frank, Mueller? I don't think I know any. You know my wife, Linda. Quite well, from what I understand. Frank's voice remained conversationless, but those who knew him would have recognized the deadly calm. What you don't know is that I own your company. Half of the past 7 years through Meridian Holdings. Check your corporate structure, Rick. Check who really signs your paychecks. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Frank could hear frantic typing, then a sharp intake of breath. That's impossible, Rick whispered. Meridian Holdings owns 68% of Donovan Industries. I am Meridian Holdings. Every promotion you've received, every bonus, every company car, I approved it all. And Rick, Frank's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm about to show you what happens when someone takes what belongs to me. Frank ended the call and returned to his original phone. Tyler was still there, but his laughter had died completely. Dad, what was that about? Tyler, do you remember when you were 8 and you asked me why I always told you to be loyal to family above all else? Yeah, I remember. I told you that loyalty isn't just about standing by someone when it's easy. It's about choosing them when the whole world gives you reasons not to. Frank began gathering his tools, each movement deliberate and precise. Your mother failed that test. And son, so did you. What are you talking about? Dad, you're scaring me. Frank climbed down from the roof with practiced ease. You should be scared, Tyler, because in about 6 hours, you're going to understand that the man you just mocked, the father you just betrayed, isn't the man you thought he was. He hung up and made his second call of the day. Morrison, it's Frank. Execute Protocol 7. Yes, all of it. And Morrison, make sure Linda and her boyfriend understand that I don't just take what's mine back. I take everything. Chapter 2. The Empire in Shadow. Frank's home, the modest 3-bedroom ranch that Linda had always complained about, sat empty and violated. The changed locks were a nice touch, he thought as he stood in his driveway. It showed just how little Linda understood about who she was really dealing with. Instead of forcing his way in, Frank drove across town to a building Linda had never seen. A sleek glass tower that housed the headquarters of Meridian Holdings. His real office was on the 40th floor, behind doors that required biometric scanners and security clearances Linda couldn't have imagined. Morrison Webb, his chief operations officer and the only person who knew the full extent of Frank's empire, was waiting with files spread across the conference table. It's done, Morrison said without preamble. Donovan's been removed as CEO effective immediately. The board meeting was enlightening. Frank nodded, settling into his chair. Morrison had been with him for 15 years, ever since Frank had pulled him out of a corporate scandal that would have destroyed his career. Loyalty, once earned, was rewarded generously in Frank's world. Tell me about Rick Donovan. Morrison opened the first file. Richard Rick Donovan, 45 years old. MBA from Northwestern. Divorced twice. No children. He's been CEO of Donovan Industries for 8 years, believing he earned the position through merit. Morrison's slight smile suggested otherwise. What he doesn't know is that we acquired the company specifically to test his capabilities. He's competent but unremarkable. His salary is $400,000 annually, plus bonuses. His penthouse apartment costs $6,000 a month. His cars are leased through the company, and his country club membership is corporate sponsored. All of which I've been paying for, Frank said. And Linda Marie Mueller, née Patterson, 40 years old, community college dropout. She worked as a receptionist at Patterson Marketing when you met her, a company that, incidentally, we acquired 2 years after your marriage. Morrison's expression remained neutral, but Frank caught the implication. You've been watching her that long? You asked me to monitor potential security risks to your identity. A wife with expensive tastes and flexible morals qualified. Morrison turned to another file. She's been seeing Donovan for 8 months. She believes he's her ticket to the lifestyle she's always wanted. What she doesn't realize is that everything she's fallen in love with, his wealth, his status, his success, comes from you. Frank stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere down there, Linda was probably celebrating her new life with Rick, neither of them understanding that they were already trapped in a web they couldn't see. What about Tyler? Morrison's pause was longer than usual. That's more complicated. He's 17, Frank. Still a minor. He made his choice. Frank's voice carried no emotion. He chose to mock me, to laugh at what he thought was my failure. He chose her side over mine. He's still your son. Frank turned back to Morrison, and for a moment, his mask slipped. The pain was there, raw and deep, but it was quickly buried under something harder. My son died today, Morrison. When he laughed at me, when he chose to hurt me for her entertainment, that was the end. What's left is just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. Morrison nodded slowly. He'd seen Frank write off business partners, competitors, even family members before. Once Frank decided someone was beyond redemption, they ceased to exist in his world. What are your orders? Frank returned to his chair and began outlining his plan. It was elegant in its brutality, comprehensive in its scope. By the time he was finished, Morrison was taking notes rapidly, occasionally looking up with something approaching awe. You're not just going to destroy them, Morrison said finally. You're going to erase them. I want them to understand what they've lost, Frank said. I want Linda to realize that the man she thought wasn't good enough for her was the source of everything she coveted in another. I want Rick to understand that his entire adult life has been a performance I paid for. And I want Tyler to learn that choices have consequences, even if you're 17. And after, Frank's smile was cold and final. After, they can find out what life is really like without me. They want to be free of Frank Mueller the contractor. They'll get their wish. As Morrison left to begin implementation, Frank remained in his office, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, Linda and Rick would wake up in a world where everything they thought they knew had changed. They would learn that power wasn't just about money. It was about understanding who really held the strings. And Frank Mueller, the man they had underestimated so catastrophically, held all of them. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. Linda Mueller stretched luxuriously in Rick's king-sized bed, admiring the view from his penthouse apartment. The city spread out below them, like a promise of a life she'd always deserved. She had called in sick to her job at the boutique. Not that it mattered anymore. Soon she'd never have to work again. Coffee, beautiful. Rick appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his expensive suit. He looked worried, which was unusual. Rick was always so confident, so in control. You seem tense, Linda said, accepting the mug. Everything okay at work? Rick sat heavily on the edge of the bed. There's been some complications. Corporate restructuring. Nothing for you to worry about. What Rick didn't tell her was that he'd spent the previous evening in emergency board meetings trying to understand how he'd been ousted from his own company. The documentation was ironclad, the legal framework unassailable. Meridian Holdings had executed a perfectly legal corporate takeover that had been years in the making. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Meeting at 10 a.m. We need to discuss your employment contract. Come alone. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler Mueller sat in his guidance counselor's office at Westfield High, trying to process what he was being told. I'm sorry, Tyler, but there seems to be an issue with your college applications, Mrs. Patterson said, shuffling through papers with obvious discomfort. The trust fund that was supposed to cover your tuition, it's been dissolved. What do you mean dissolved? That's impossible. My dad set that up years ago. Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely sympathetic. According to the documents I received this morning, Frank Mueller was never the beneficiary of any trust fund. The account was apparently funded by a company called Meridian Holdings, and they've withdrawn their support. Tyler's stomach dropped. That doesn't make sense. My dad's just a contractor. He doesn't have connections to big companies. His phone rang. His mother's number. Tyler, honey, we need to talk. Can you come to Rick's office? Something's happened. The desperation in her voice was something Tyler had never heard before. At Donovan Industries, chaos was barely contained behind corporate politeness. Rick sat across from three lawyers, all wearing expressions that suggested his world was about to collapse entirely. Mr. Donovan, the lead attorney began, your employment contract contains some unusual clauses that we apparently overlooked during your original review. What kind of clauses? Termination for cause includes any personal conduct that reflects poorly on the company's ownership. Dating a married woman qualifies under the morality clause. Rick's face went white. That's ridiculous. Corporate morality clauses are from the 1950s. They're not enforceable. This one is. And there's more. The lawyer slid another document across the table. Your apartment lease, your car leases, your country club membership, they're all corporate benefits tied to your employment. Termination means immediate forfeiture. You're telling me I'm homeless? As of 5 p.m. today, yes. Security will escort you out at that time. Linda arrived just as Rick was reading the final documents. She took one look at his face and knew something was catastrophically wrong. Rick, what's happening? Before he could answer, Tyler burst through the office doors, past security, his face flushed with panic and anger. Mom, what the hell is going on? They're saying Dad cancel my college fund. They're saying he's connected to some big company. Nothing makes sense. Linda stared at her son. Pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve beginning to click into place. Tyler, calm down. Your father is just a contractor. He makes $23,000 a year fixing roofs. Then explain this. Tyler thrust his phone at her, showing a Google search result. Meridian Holdings. Look at the corporate officers. Linda's hands shook as she scrolled through the information. Chairman and CEO, Franklin J. Mueller. Net worth, estimated at $800 million. Primary holdings, construction, real estate, manufacturing, technology. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. That's not possible, she whispered. Frank drives a pickup truck. He wears work boots. He's nobody. Rick stood up slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He's not nobody, Linda. He's the man who's been signing my paychecks for 7 years. He owns this company. He owns the apartment, the cars, everything I thought was mine. The office door opened, and Morrison Webb entered with 2 security guards. His expression was politely professional, the look of a man conducting unpleasant but necessary business. Ms. Mueller, Mr. Donovan, Tyler, he nodded to each of them. I'm Morrison Webb, representing Meridian Holdings. I have some documents for you to review. He placed 3 envelopes on the desk. These contain the terms of your separation from Mr. Mueller's life. I strongly suggest you read them carefully. Linda's envelope contained divorce papers and an eviction notice. Rick's contained his termination letter and a lawsuit for corporate asset misuse. Tyler's contained documentation that his college trust fund had never legally existed. It had been a corporate scholarship program that was now discontinued. This is insane, Linda said, her voice rising to near hysteria. You can't just destroy people's lives because of a relationship. Morrison's smile was thin and cold. Mrs. Mueller, your husband spent 3 years living below his means to test your loyalty. You failed that test spectacularly. These aren't punishments. They're simply the natural consequences of your choices. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. Mr. Mueller asked me to tell you that the locks on the house have been changed back. He'll be home at 6 if you'd like to collect your belongings. I wouldn't suggest staying long. As Morrison left, the three conspirators stared at each other in growing horror, finally understanding that they hadn't just betrayed a simple contractor. They had betrayed a man who owned half the city and who had just declared war on them all. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. Frank stood in his kitchen, methodically preparing dinner for one. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if removing Linda's presence had purged it of something toxic. He'd had the locks changed back, not to keep her out, but to make a point. This was still his house, bought with his money, maintained by his labor. Everything she'd taken for granted had always been his. The front door rattled with frantic knocking at exactly 6:15 p.m. Frank smiled slightly. Linda had never been punctual, but desperation apparently improved her timing. He opened the door to find all three of them. Linda, wild-eyed and disheveled. Rick, no longer wearing his expensive suit, but cheap clothes that revealed how ordinary he really was. And Tyler, looking young and scared for the first time in years. "Frank, please," Linda began, pushing past him into the house she'd locked him out of that morning. "We need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake." "No mistake." Frank closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. "Everything that's happened today was planned 3 years ago, the day I decided to test whether my family loved me or just loved what they thought I could provide." Tyler stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said. I was just upset, and Mom said." "Tyler." Frank's voice cut through his son's, pleading like a blade. "Do you remember last Christmas when you asked me why I never talked about my work?" Tyler nodded miserably. "I told you that some things were complicated, and you said you didn't care because complicated things were boring." Frank's gaze never wavered from his son's face. "Today you learned that boring, complicated things like corporate structures and trust funds are what determine whether you get to go to college. Do you understand now why I try to teach you to look deeper than surface appearances?" "Dad, please." "You chose your side, Tyler. When you called me today, you weren't just repeating your mother's words. You were enjoying hurting me. You laughed at what you thought was my failure." Rick finally found his voice. "Look, Frank, I didn't know Linda was married when we started dating. She told me you were separated." Frank turned his attention to Rick, and the man unconsciously stepped backward. "Rick, in 7 years of working for me, you never once wondered how a small construction company could afford to give you such generous compensation. You never questioned why your performance reviews were always exemplary despite your obvious limitations. I earned my position. You earned nothing. I gave you that position because I wanted to study you. I wanted to understand what kind of man my wife would choose over me." Frank's smile was devoid of warmth. "Turns out, she chose someone even more ordinary than she thought I was." Linda moved closer to her husband, desperation making her bold. "Frank, I made a mistake. I see that now. But we've been married 23 years. That has to count for something. It counted for 3 years, Linda. 3 years where I lived in this modest house, drove an old truck, and worked with my hands to see if you loved Frank Mueller or just loved what Frank Mueller could buy you." Frank's voice remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. "Every time you complained about money, every time you looked at me with disappointment, every time you hinted that I wasn't enough, I was testing you. And Linda, you failed every single test." He walked to the kitchen and returned with a stack of photographs. "Do you recognize these?" Linda's face went pale as she flipped through images of herself and Rick at restaurants, hotels, shopping trips. Every moment of their affair had been documented with professional precision. "I've known about your relationship for 8 months, Frank continued. "I could have stopped it at any time. I chose not to because I wanted to see how far you'd go. I wanted to see if you'd ever feel guilty enough to confess, or if you'd respect our marriage enough to end it before pursuing someone else. You were watching me?" Linda's voice was barely a whisper. "I was giving you every opportunity to prove me wrong. Right up until today, I hoped you might surprise me." Tyler looked between his parents, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "Dad, what happens now?" Frank's expression softened for just a moment, and Tyler saw a flash of the father he remembered from childhood. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder and more final than anything Tyler had ever seen. Now you learn to live with the consequences of your choices. All of you. He opened the front door. You have 30 minutes to collect whatever belongs to you personally. Linda, your clothes and jewelry. The jewelry I didn't buy. Rick, nothing in this house belongs to you, so you can wait outside. Tyler. Frank paused, looking at his son for what both of them somehow knew would be the last time. Take whatever reminds you of who you used to be before today. As they scrambled to gather their belongings, Frank made one final call. Morrison? Yes, they're here now. Activate Phase 2 tomorrow morning. And Morrison? Make sure they understand that this was just the beginning. Chapter 5. The Web Titans. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation, and the full scope of Frank's revenge was beginning to reveal itself. Linda had moved into a studio apartment across town, the only place she could afford after being fired from the boutique. The official reason was downsizing, but she suspected the truth was more complicated. Everything in her life seemed to be falling apart with mechanical precision. Tyler was staying with his mother, sleeping on her couch and trying to understand how his entire future had vanished overnight. His friends at school treated him differently now, distant and awkward, ever since the story of his father's true identity had spread through their small community. Rick had disappeared entirely. Linda hadn't heard from him since the day they'd been escorted from the Donovan Industries building. Her calls went straight to voicemail. It was as if he'd simply been erased. She was about to discover that erasure was exactly what had happened. Morrison Webb sat in his office, reviewing the reports from his field teams. Frank's instructions had been specific, systematic destruction, but nothing that could be traced back to them directly. Everything had to appear to be natural consequences, market forces, or simple bad luck. Rick Donovan has been neutralized, his assistant reported. His credit has been destroyed through legitimate debt collection agencies. Apparently, he had several outstanding loans we weren't aware of. The default cascade was efficient. Morrison nodded. Rick's financial destruction had been artfully orchestrated. Old debts have been sold to aggressive collection agencies. Credit reports have been updated to reflect previously unreported delinquencies, and legal notices have been filed in jurisdictions where Rick was unlikely to respond in time. Within 2 weeks, the man had been reduced to living in a weekly rate motel, unable to secure employment or housing. And Linda Mueller? Her employment network has been compromised. Every job interview she's had has been followed by phone calls expressing concern about her character references. The divorce proceedings are advancing rapidly due to her inability to secure adequate legal representation. Tyler, the assistant, hesitated. The boy has been asking questions. He's smart, and he's starting to piece together that none of this is coincidence. He's also been trying to contact his father. Morrison considered this. Frank had been clear that Tyler was to face consequences, but the boy was still a minor. There were legal and ethical boundaries, even in revenge. Continue monitoring, but no direct action against Tyler unless he becomes a problem. Frank may be angry, but he's not stupid. We don't target children. What Morrison didn't know was that Tyler had already crossed a line that would force Frank's hand. That evening, Tyler stood outside the Meridian Holdings headquarters, studying the building where his father, the stranger who had been masquerading as a simple contractor, apparently ran his empire. Security was tight, but Tyler had learned patience from watching his father work. He waited until the shift change at midnight, then slipped through a service entrance that was briefly unmanned. The 40-floor climb took him nearly an hour, but he was determined to confront Frank in his real environment, away from the modest house that now seemed like an elaborate stage set. Frank's office was dark when Tyler finally reached it, but the door was unlocked. Tyler slipped inside, surprised by the opulence that his father had hidden so completely. Awards covered one wall. Corporate photos showed Frank shaking hands with mayors and governors, and the view from the window revealed a city that Tyler was only now realizing his father largely owned. "You're trespassing." Tyler spun around to find Frank sitting in the shadows behind his desk. He was still wearing work clothes, but something about his posture in this environment made him seem different, more dangerous. Frank, you lost the right to call me Dad when you chose to hurt me for your mother's entertainment. Tyler's courage wavered, but desperation drove him forward. I came to ask you to stop. Whatever you're doing to Mom, to Rick, just stop. I get it, okay? You're rich and powerful, and we didn't know. We made a mistake. But this is insane. Frank stood and walked to the window, his back to Tyler. Do you know what I was doing 3 years ago when I decided to test your mother's loyalty? Working construction. I was recovering from a hostile takeover attempt that nearly destroyed everything I'd built. Men I trusted, partners I'd worked with for decades, tried to steal my companies from me. Frank's voice was quiet but carried clearly in the silent office. I learned something important from that experience. Loyalty isn't just about love. It's about choosing someone even when you have good reasons not to. He turned to face Tyler. Your mother didn't just choose another man over me. She actively worked to destroy whatever respect you had for me. She turned my own son into a weapon against me. She was hurt and angry. People say stupid things when they're hurt. Tyler, your mother wasn't hurt when she started her affair with Rick. She was bored. She was disappointed in the life she thought she'd chosen. Frank's eyes held a sadness that Tyler had never seen before. I gave her 23 years of my life, and when she thought I had nothing left to offer, she threw me away like garbage. So you're destroying her life? Destroying Rick's life? What kind of person does that? Frank's expression hardened. The kind of person who doesn't accept betrayal. The kind of person who believes actions have consequences. Tyler stepped closer to his father's desk, desperate to reach whatever remained of the man who had taught him to ride a bike and helped him with homework. What about me, Dad? I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything? For a moment, Frank's mask slipped entirely. Tyler saw pain, disappointment, and something that might have been love. Then it was gone. You stopped being my son when you chose to mock me. When you laughed at what you thought was my failure. When you decided that a stranger's money was more important than your father's love. I was 17. I was stupid and angry, and I didn't understand. You understood enough to hurt me deliberately. You understood enough to choose your mother's side over mine. Frank walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of Tyler. I spent your entire childhood teaching you about loyalty, about family, about choosing character over comfort. The moment you were tested, you failed. Tyler felt tears streaming down his face. So that's it? You're just going to pretend I don't exist? Tyler, you made that choice first. You called me on Father's Day to tell me I wasn't good enough, that another man was replacing me, that my own son thought I was a failure. Frank's voice remained steady, but Tyler could see the cost of this conversation in his father's eyes. You can't unmake that choice. You can't take back that laughter. People change. People grow up. I could. No. Frank's finality was absolute. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. You're 17, Tyler. In 8 months, you'll be an adult. You'll face the world with the character you've chosen to develop, and you'll live with the consequences of the choices you've made. Tyler stared at his father, seeing a stranger who wore a familiar face. You're really going to let Mom destroy herself rather than forgive her? Tyler, I'm not destroying your mother. I'm simply withdrawing my protection from the consequences of her choices. For 23 years, I shielded her from the real world. Now she gets to experience it without me. Frank walked back to his chair and sat down, effectively dismissing his son. Security will escort you out. Don't come back. Tyler reached the door before turning back one last time. I used to think you were the best man I knew. Frank didn't look up from the papers on his desk. I used to think you were my son. After Tyler left, Frank sat alone in his office until dawn, staring out at the city lights and wondering if there was a price too high to pay for absolute loyalty. He decided there wasn't. Chapter 6, No Mercy. The Riverside Community Center was hosting its weekly support group for families in crisis, and Linda found herself sitting in a circle of folding chairs, surrounded by people whose lives had also imploded in various ways. She'd been attending for 2 weeks, partly for the free coffee and partly because it was the only place where her story didn't sound. Linda, would you like to share this week? Asked Dr. Patricia Vance, the volunteer counselor who ran the group. Linda looked around at the familiar faces, single mothers, unemployed fathers, elderly people struggling with medical bills. A month ago, she would have pitied them. Now she was one of them. My husband is systematically destroying my life, she began, her voice hollow. Not just financially, everything. Every job interview I go to ends with them suddenly deciding I'm not qualified. My credit score changes daily. Bills I never owed are showing up in collections. It's like he's erasing me. A woman named Cheryl nodded sympathetically. Vindictive ex-husbands can be brutal. My ex used to hide my car keys so I'd be late for work. Linda almost laughed. If only it were that simple. You don't understand. My husband owns companies. Major companies. He has resources I didn't even know existed. She pulled out her phone and showed them a photograph of Frank from a business magazine. This is him. This is the man I thought was a struggling contractor. The group stared at the image of Frank shaking hands with the governor at some corporate event, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Linda's monthly rent. Jesus, whispered Bob, a laid-off factory worker. That's your husband? For 23 years, he pretended to be ordinary. He lived in a modest house, drove an old truck, worked construction jobs. I had no idea he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Dr. Vance leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. Why would someone hide that kind of wealth from their family? He says he was testing my loyalty. He wanted to see if I loved him or just loved what he could provide. Linda's voice cracked. I failed his test. The group was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. So what are you going to do? Asked Cheryl. Linda had been asking herself the same question for weeks. Every legal avenue seemed blocked. Frank's attorneys were better than anyone she could afford, and the divorce proceedings were advancing with ruthless efficiency. He was giving her nothing beyond what the law absolutely required, and even it seemed designed to humiliate her. I don't know, she admitted. I keep thinking there has to be something. Some way to make him understand that destroying me won't fix what went wrong between us. What Linda didn't know was that Frank had no interest in fixing anything. 3 floors above the community center, in the offices of Patterson Marketing, one of the many companies Frank had quietly acquired over the years, Morrison Webb was conducting his weekly briefing. Linda Mueller has been neutralized as a threat, he reported to Frank via secure video call. Her ability to cause financial or reputational damage is essentially zero. Rick Donovan has left the state entirely, apparently found work as a night shift security guard in Phoenix under an assumed name. Frank nodded from his office. And Tyler, the boy is struggling academically. Without the college trust fund, his guidance counselor says his options are limited to community college or military service. He's been working part-time at a grocery store to help his mother with rent. Good. Reality is an excellent teacher. Morrison hesitated. Frank, I have to ask, how long does this continue? Linda Mueller is essentially homeless. Tyler is a 17-year-old kid whose entire future has been destroyed. At what point is the lesson learned? Frank's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Morrison, did I ever tell you about my father? No, sir. Vincent Mueller was a mechanic who owned 2 gas stations. Not wealthy, but comfortable. When I was 16, my mother ran off with the man who supplied parts to Dad's shops. She took everything, cleaned out the bank accounts, sold her jewelry, even took the family car. Frank paused, staring out his office window. Dad never got over it. He died broke and bitter, destroyed by trusting someone who betrayed him the moment a better option appeared. Morrison waited, understanding that this was leading somewhere important. I swore I would never be that weak. I would never trust someone so completely that their betrayal could destroy me. Frank's voice carried the weight of a promise made decades ago. Linda chose her path when she decided I wasn't enough. Tyler chose his when he decided to mock me for her entertainment. They're both adults now, Morrison. Adults live with the consequences of their choices. Tyler's still in high school. Tyler's old enough to understand loyalty and betrayal. Old enough to choose cruelty over compassion. Old enough to laugh at his father's pain. Frank's finality was absolute. Some lessons can only be learned through loss. Morrison, and some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay that way. The call ended, and Morrison sat back in his chair, troubled by what he'd heard. He'd worked for Frank for 15 years, had seen him make difficult decisions, had watched him destroy competitors and rivals without hesitation. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that might be consuming the man Morrison respected more than anyone else in the world. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler Mueller was stocking shelves at Westfield Market, trying to process how his life had changed so completely in just 6 weeks. His co-workers were friendly enough, but he could see the curiosity in their eyes. Everyone in town knew the story by now. How Frank Mueller, the quiet contractor, had revealed himself to be one of the wealthiest men in the state, and how his family had betrayed him so spectacularly that he'd cut them off entirely. Some people sympathized with Tyler, seeing him as a victim of his parents' war. Others whispered that he must have done something terrible to earn such complete rejection from his father. Tyler knew which group was right. As he arranged cans of soup on the shelf, he thought about the conversation in his father's office, about the look in Frank's eyes when Tyler had called him Dad and been corrected. He thought about the laughter, about the cruel joy he'd felt when he thought he was kicking a man who was already down. He thought about the father who had taught him to throw a baseball, who had helped him with math homework, who had never once raised his voice in anger despite Tyler's teenage rebellion. That man was gone, replaced by a stranger who had the resources to destroy lives and the will to use them. Tyler was beginning to understand that some mistakes were too big to fix, some words too cruel to take back, and some fathers too powerful to forgive. Chapter 7. The Price of Pride. 6 months after Father's Day, Linda Mueller stood in the lobby of the Riverside Hotel, holding a cleaning cart and trying to invisible. The hotel was one of the nicer establishments in town. 4 stars, business clientele, the kind of place she'd once stayed during weekend getaways with Frank. Now she cleaned the rooms. The irony wasn't lost on her that the hotel was owned by Meridian Holdings, Frank's company. Every paycheck she received, every hour she worked, was ultimately at his discretion. He could fire her with a phone call, but he didn't. Instead, he let her work, let her earn just enough to survive in her studio apartment, let her maintain the barest threads of dignity while knowing that her survival depended entirely on his continued tolerance. It was, Linda had come to realize, a far more sophisticated form of torture than simple destruction would have been. "Linda, you've got the penthouse today," said Sandra, the head of housekeeping. There was sympathy in her voice. Everyone knew Linda's story by now, and most of the staff felt sorry for her. The guest checked out early, so it should be straightforward. Linda nodded and pushed her cart toward the elevator. The penthouse was the hotel's most expensive suite, the one that Rick used to book for their afternoon meetings when they thought they were being discreet. She wondered if Frank had assigned her to clean it deliberately, just to drive the point home. The suite was immaculate when she entered. Whoever had stayed there had barely disturbed anything. As she worked, Linda found herself thinking about Tyler. Her son had gotten his GED and was working full-time now, talking about community college but unable to afford it. He'd grown quieter over the past few months, more serious, as if the weight of understanding what they'd lost was finally sinking in. She was stripping the bed when she heard the suite door open. "I thought I might find you here." Linda froze. She knew that voice, had been married to it for 23 years. Slowly, she turned to see Frank standing in the doorway, wearing a business suit that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past month. "Frank." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. He looked older, she noticed, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Success hadn't made him happy. If anything, he seemed more remote than ever. "How are you, Linda?" The question was so absurd that she almost laughed. "How do you think I am? I'm cleaning hotel rooms for minimum wage. I'm living in a studio apartment with no furniture. I'm exactly where you wanted me to be." Frank walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "This isn't where I wanted you to be. This is where you chose to be." "I chose." Linda's voice rose dangerously. "I chose to have my entire life destroyed because I made one mistake." "One mistake." Frank turned to face her, and Linda saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before: genuine confusion. "Linda, you had an affair for 8 months. You mocked me to our son. You changed the locks on our house and told Tyler I was worthless. Exactly which part of that was one mistake? Linda felt tears burning her eyes. I was unhappy, Frank. I was tired of struggling, tired of watching other wives have things I could never afford. I didn't know. You didn't know what? That I loved you enough to give you everything if you'd just been patient enough to trust me. Frank's voice remained calm, but Linda could hear the pain underneath. 23 years, Linda. 23 years of marriage, and the moment you thought I had nothing left to offer, you threw me away. That's not fair. You hid who you were. You made me think we were poor. I was protecting you from the kind of people who would use you to get to me. I was making sure that if someone loved me, they loved me for who I was, not what I owned. Frank's laugh was bitter. Turns out I was right to be cautious. Linda sank into one of the suite's expensive chairs, suddenly exhausted. So what now, Frank? You've proven your point. You've shown me what life is like without your protection. How long does this continue? Frank studied her for a long moment. What do you want me to say, Linda? That I forgive you? That we can go back to the way things were? I want you to show mercy. I want you to remember that you loved me once. I did love you. I loved you enough to build an empire and hide it from the world just to keep you safe. I loved you enough to live below my means for 3 years to make sure you loved me back. Frank's voice grew quiet. But love without loyalty is worthless. Trust without faithfulness is meaningless. People make mistakes, Frank. People change. Some changes are permanent. Linda, some choices can't be undone. Frank walked toward the door, then paused. I've been thinking about what you said that day Tyler called me. You told him I wasn't good enough, that Rick was more successful, more worthy of respect. Do you remember that? Linda nodded miserably. The truth is, Linda, I wasn't good enough. Not for you. Because you needed someone who would fight for you, who would prove their worth every day, who would compete for your attention and affection. Frank opened the door. I needed someone who would choose me even when they thought I had nothing left to offer. We were never compatible in the ways that mattered. Frank, wait. But he was gone, leaving Linda alone in the penthouse suite with her cleaning cart and the growing understanding that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler Mueller was having his own moment of reckoning. He'd been walking past the construction site where his father's truck was parked. Frank had apparently returned to working with his hands, though Tyler suspected it was more for therapeutic value than financial necessity. Tyler had been walking past the site every day for a week, hoping for a glimpse of the man who used to be his father, try to work up the courage for a conversation he wasn't sure was possible. Today, Frank was sitting on the tailgate of his truck, eating lunch alone. Tyler approached slowly, half expecting to be turned away. Hello, Frank. Frank looked up, his expression unreadable. Tyler, can we talk? Frank gestured to a stack of lumber nearby. Tyler sat down, suddenly aware of how different they both looked. Frank seemed older, more weathered, but also more solid somehow, as if the revelation of his true self had allowed him to finally relax. Tyler, meanwhile, felt smaller than he had at 17, diminished by months of understanding the magnitude of his mistakes. I got my GD, Tyler said finally. I know. Congratulations. I'm working full-time now, trying to save money for community college. Frank nodded but didn't respond. I understand now, Tyler continued, what I did to you, what Mom did to you. I understand why you can't forgive us. Do you? Tyler met his father's eyes. You spent 3 years testing whether we loved you or just loved what you could provide. We failed. We failed spectacularly. Yes, you did. I keep thinking about that phone call, about how happy I was to hurt you, about how I laughed when I thought you were weak. Tyler's voice cracked. I don't know who that person was, but I don't want to be him anymore. Frank studied his son for a long moment. Growing up is recognizing that some things can't be fixed, Tyler. Some words can't be taken back. Some trust can't be rebuilt. So there's nothing? No way back. Frank's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Tyler saw a flash of the father he remembered. Then it was gone. Tyler, the boy who called me on Father's Day and laughed at my pain. That boy was my son. The young man sitting here now, understanding the weight of his choices. You might be someone I could respect, but you're not my son anymore. Tyler felt the finality of it settle over him like a shroud. I understand. I hope you do. I hope you take that understanding and build something better than what you were. Frank stood up, gathering his lunch. But you'll build it without me. As Frank walked away, Tyler remained sitting on the lumber, finally understanding that some consequences were permanent, some losses absolute. His father had taught him one final lesson, that actions have prices, and some prices are too high to ever fully pay. Chapter 8. The Final Gambit. 2 years had passed since the Father's Day phone call that destroyed the Mueller family. Linda had found a strange kind of peace in her diminished circumstances, though she suspected Frank had quietly ensured she wouldn't fall into complete destitution. Her rent was somehow always affordable, her shifts at the hotel were steady, and while she lived simply, she lived. Tyler had surprised everyone, including himself. Working his way through community college while maintaining a full-time job had taught him discipline he'd never possessed as a teenager. He was studying business administration, and his professors frequently commented on his unusual maturity and work ethic. What they didn't know was that every success felt hollow without the approval of the man who had once been his father. Frank had returned to his true nature, a successful businessman who happened to enjoy construction work. He'd sold several companies, consolidated others, and had begun focusing on philanthropic work. The local newspapers occasionally ran stories about anonymous donations to scholarship funds and community programs, but Frank maintained his privacy with the same intensity he'd once used to hide his wealth. On a cold February morning, Tyler made a decision that would either end his exile permanently or give him the closure he desperately needed. He walked into the Meridian Holdings headquarters and asked to see Morrison Webb. "Tyler Mueller to see you, sir," the receptionist announced over the intercom. "He says it's about his father." Morrison appeared in the lobby 15 minutes later, looking older but still sharp. He studied Tyler with curiosity. The young man had filled out over the past 2 years, looked less like a sullen teenager and more like someone who had learned hard lessons about life. "Tyler, this is unexpected. Mr. Webb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me an honest answer." Morrison gestured toward his office. "I'll listen." They sat across from each other in Morrison's conference room, and Tyler got straight to the point. "Is my father having me watched?" Morrison's expression didn't change. "Why would you think that?" "Because somehow, every time I've been in real trouble over the past 2 years, help has appeared. When I couldn't afford textbooks, I found an envelope with cash in my locker. When my car broke down, a mechanic offered to fix it for free because he said someone had prepaid the work. When I applied for that scholarship last semester, I was mysteriously selected despite having average grades." Morrison remained silent. "I know he's protecting me, Mr. Webb, just like he's protecting Mom. She thinks she's surviving on her own, but I bet if you checked, you'd find that her rent is below market rate. Her job is more secure than it should be, and her medical insurance is better than a hotel cleaning lady should be able to afford." Morrison finally spoke. "What makes you think your father would help people who betrayed him so completely?" Tyler leaned forward. "Because despite everything we did to him, despite how badly we hurt him, he's still my father. And more than that, he's still a good man. He's punishing us, but he's not trying to destroy us completely. Even if that were true, what would you want me to do about it?" Tyler pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table. "I want you to give him this letter, and I want you to tell him that I'm done accepting his help." Morrison picked up the envelope but didn't open it. "Tyler, if your father wanted to communicate with you, you would have done so by now. I know. This isn't about communication. This is about me proving that I've finally learned the lesson he was trying to teach me. Which is..." Tyler stood up. "That real strength comes from standing on your own. That character is what you do when no one is watching, when no one is helping, when you have nothing but your own choices to rely on." He paused at the door. "Tell him I said thank you. For everything. Even for the pain. Especially for the pain." After Tyler left, Morrison sat alone with the letter for nearly an hour before calling Frank. "We need to meet," Morrison said simply. They met that evening in Frank's office, the same room where Tyler had confronted his father 2 years earlier. Morrison placed the letter on Frank's desk without comment. Frank stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Morrison watched his face as he read, seeing emotions Frank rarely allowed himself to display. Finally, Frank set the letter down. What did you think of him? He's not the same boy who called you that day, Morrison said carefully. He's grown up, learned responsibility, learned consequences. And Linda, she's different too. Quieter. She works hard, doesn't complain, treats her coworkers well. The staff at the hotel respects her. Morrison paused. She asks about you sometimes. Wonders if you're happy. Frank walked to his window, looking out at the city lights. Do you think I was wrong, Morrison? To cut them off so completely. Morrison had been waiting 2 years for this question. I think you did what you thought was necessary to protect yourself from being hurt again. Whether it was right or wrong isn't for me to judge. They destroyed something in me that day, Morrison. The ability to trust completely, to love without reservation. I don't know if that can ever be repaired. Maybe the question isn't whether it can be repaired. Maybe the question is whether you want to try. Frank was quiet for a long time. What did Tyler say when he left? He said to tell you thank you. For everything. Even for the pain. Especially for the pain. Frank closed his eyes. Especially for the pain. He understands now what you were trying to teach him. About choices, about consequences, about character. Morrison moved closer to the window. The question is, what do you want to do with that understanding? Frank picked up Tyler's letter and read it again. Then he walked to his desk and began writing his own letter. Morrison, I want you to deliver this to Tyler tomorrow. And then I want you to arrange a meeting. With Tyler. With both of them. Linda and Tyler. It's time we finish this conversation properly. Morrison took the letter Frank handed him. Are you sure about this? Frank looked older in that moment, worn down by 2 years of anger and isolation. No, but I'm tired of being alone with my righteousness. And maybe Tyler's right. Maybe the lesson has been learned. As Morrison left to arrange the meeting that would determine whether the Mueller family could ever be whole again, Frank stood alone in his office, holding his son's letter and wondering if forgiveness was a luxury he could finally afford, or a weakness he still couldn't risk. Chapter 9, Resurrection. The meeting was set for neutral ground, a small conference room in a downtown office building that Frank owned, but neither Linda nor Tyler had ever seen. Morrison had delivered Frank's letter to Tyler with simple instructions. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., bring your mother. Tyler had found Linda at the hotel in the middle of her shift. When he showed her Frank's handwriting on the envelope, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it. You want to see us? She whispered. Both of us. Together. Linda sat down heavily in one of the hotel lobby chairs, ignoring the curious glances from guests. Tyler, I don't know if I can do this. It's been 2 years. What if he's still angry? What if he can't forgive us? What if this is just another test we're going to fail? Tyler sat beside his mother, understanding her fear because he felt it too. Mom, we already lost everything. We already know the worst-case scenario. At least this way, we'll finally know where we stand. The next day, they arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the building lobby, both dressed in their best clothes, which weren't very good. Linda wore a dress she'd bought at a thrift store, and Tyler wore his only suit, purchased for high school graduation and now slightly too small. Morrison appeared at exactly 2 p.m. He's waiting for you. The conference room was small and simple, with a rectangular table and 6 chairs. Frank sat at one end, wearing work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots. He looked like the man they'd known before everything fell apart, except for his eyes. His eyes held 2 years of accumulated pain and anger and something else that might have been hope. Linda and Tyler sat across from him, suddenly aware of how much they'd both changed. Linda looked older, worn by work and worry, but somehow more authentic than she'd been during her marriage. Tyler looked like a man instead of a boy, carrying himself with a confidence that came from surviving on his own. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Frank broke the silence. Tyler, I read your letter. I meant every word. I know you did. That's why I asked you to come. Frank leaned back in his chair. 2 years ago, you were a spoiled teenager who thought mockery was funny and cruelty was acceptable. Today, you're a young man who's worked his way through college while supporting his mother. That's not the same person. Tyler nodded. I'm not the same person. The person who called you that day was someone I'm ashamed of. Someone who hurt the best man in his life, because he thought it was entertaining. Frank turned to Linda. And you, 2 years ago, you were a woman who thought she deserved more than what she had, who was willing to betray her marriage for the promise of an easier life. Today, you're someone who works hard for minimum wage and treats her coworkers with respect. That's not the same person either. Linda's voice was barely audible. I understand now what I lost. Not just the money, not just the comfort, but you. I lost the man who loved me enough to give me everything and ask for nothing but loyalty in return. Frank was quiet for a long moment. Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the affair. It wasn't even a mockery. It was the realization that for 23 years, I was married to someone who was just waiting for a better offer. That's not true, Linda said, tears streaming down her face. I loved you. You loved the idea of me. You loved what you thought I could provide. But you never loved me enough to trust me, to believe in me when things seemed difficult. Frank's voice remained calm, but the pain was evident. When you thought I was failing, you didn't stand by me. You replaced me. Tyler spoke up. What can we do? How we prove that we've changed? Frank smiled sadly. Tyler, that's the wrong question. You don't need to prove anything to me anymore. You've both learned to stand on your own, to face consequences, to build character through adversity. That was the lesson. Then why are we here? Linda asked. Frank stood and walked to the window. Because I've learned something too. I've learned that being right isn't the same as being happy. That justice isn't the same as peace. That punishing people you once loved doesn't make the love disappear. It just makes it hurt more. He turned back to face them. I spent 2 years being angry, and I had every right to be angry. But anger is exhausting, and loneliness is expensive, and I've discovered that I'm tired of both. Tyler leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying that forgiveness isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about deciding that the past doesn't have to determine the future. Frank returned to his seat. You both made choices that hurt me deeply. I made choices that punished you severely. We're all different people now because of those choices. Linda found her voice. Frank, are you saying you can forgive us? Frank was quiet for a long time, studying both of their faces. I'm saying that Tyler is no longer the boy who mocked me, and Linda is no longer the woman who betrayed me. You're both people I don't know very well yet, but people I might like to know better. What does that mean, practically? Tyler asked. It means we start over. Not as if the past didn't happen, but acknowledging that people can change, that character can be rebuilt, that trust can be earned again, slowly, carefully, with full understanding of what was lost the first time. Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 keys. Linda, this is to a house on Maple Street. It's small but comfortable, and it's yours for as long as you want it. Tyler, this is to an apartment near the college. Your tuition has been paid through graduation. Linda stared at the key in her palm. Frank, I can't accept this. Not after. You can accept it because you've proven you can survive without it. The woman who betrayed me was motivated by greed and fear. The woman sitting here now has learned to work hard and live simply. I'm not giving you charity, Linda. I'm offering you the foundation to build whatever life you choose to build. Tyler was holding his key like it might disappear. What about you? What do you fit in this new life we're supposed to build? Frank's smile was real for the first time in 2 years. That depends on what kind of people you choose.